Hey, what's up, you guys? It's me, your girl Alex, and I am back. I am going to be playing another farming game that I found interesting. It's called Big Farm Story. I have it on and ready to go. I don't really have much to say. Nothing really interesting has happened. But let's get this game going. Let me start the fanfic though. It's almost done. There's like a couple more chapters to go, but we're almost done with Strong World, which is fucking amazing.
Usopp, are you alright? And then he heard a familiar voice and it all made sense.
You just speed it
He
up
had no
a
idea
bit.
how happy I am to see you, Canis. Usopp half sobbed. It took an effort of will, but he managed to avoid clutching her leg at least. Instead, he just hung onto the arm she gave him for dear life. For a second there, I thought that Dan Snail had rung my bell for good. Nah, soundbite wouldn't off you like that. Sue waved her paw dismissively. He'd make sure there were far more bells and whistles on the ordeal. But anyway, you take care of Canis for me for a second, would you? I've got a little errand I need to run before we get out of here. So saying, Sue leaped off of Canis' shoulder and scampered off, taking the time to hop stomp on a few
excuse
stirring
me.
milks as she went. For several seconds, the two just stared, and then Usopp looked back at Canis. So,
The
Blitz
art
bazooka's
looks
working
so
out like we
cute.
hoped. The angel gunner promptly brightened up and nodded eagerly as she showed off the second bazooka she was wielding in an underslung fashion with her left hand. Mirroring the burned bazooka,
Cold
she had in the
water.
right. Very well, yes. The charge time takes some getting used to, but your idea of swapping the flavor flame combination for a Cloud Thunder pair worked wonders. Ah, but more importantly, she cast an analytical gaze over her unwitting opponents.
Oh, what
Any
is
idea for your head
going
count so
on?
far, Usopp? Huh. The sniper's face scrunched up in thought. Let's say, there were a few dozen in that first group. Gwitha. Both looked up to see a ragged,
shit, wait,
gaunt man
what?
brandishing a flaming sword charging straight at them. Up went Kabuto, up went Canis' bazookas. Clang! And then Usopp and Canis jumped back in surprise when, of all things, an anvil slammed through the ceiling and fell on the man's head, burying
Oh
him in the floorboards
no.
up to his shoulders. I really wanted to keep that anvil
Damn it.
too, came Mary's whining voice through the hole. Twayage Mew, Wikaru sighed in response. Ergigig, the men groaned, somehow still alive. Did that just happen?
Annoyance.
Canis wondered. Let's not question it, Usopp replied, shaking his head. Now where were we? Oh, right, body counts. Ah yes, Canis said with a serene smile, patting her weapon. A few dozen, you said. Impressive, though I think I have the advantage. This bazooka has taken down at least 100 pirates every time I fired it. Usopp froze for a moment, then rallied. You don't say. And how many times was that? Oh. The squawk of disbelief and sob of inadequacy at the answer echoed all the way in the courtyard, where another brawl was going on between the Golden Mine pirates, the Beasts of Merve, and the Tididabus. Did anyone hear that? Mikey idly queried. Tightening the grip his nunchucks had on the massive snake he was currently sitting on the back of, he hopped off, flipped, and pile-drive the snake straight into the dirt. Yeah. Sounds like the noises Leo makes whenever Zoro forces him into a spar, Donnie replied. Planting his staff, he spun around in place, smacking his tail off the faces of every pirate in a radius the length of his body. You're the last person I want to hear that from, mister. Got press ganged by the Mad Doctor. Leo roared, his anger transferring into his blades, which launched two winds that carved a
I
swat through the
kind of
pirates
want
and
to
down
play
the giant,
Coral Island,
saber-toothed
but
jaguar
I
that had been
don't
roaming the
have
perimeter of the
it.
brawl. A sharp-fanged, demonic-looking great
It would
kangaroo
take
took the
too long
opportunity
to
to leap at
download
Leo,
the
only to eat a
bootleg
sight each to the arm
version.
and chest. Raffi slammed into it a moment later, smashing it into the ground and grabbing her weapons back simultaneously. Watch your back, idiot. She snapped, hopping off the kangaroo. As she blocked the swords of four separate pirates, the beast shakily got back to its feet, only to get smashed on the skull by Donnie's staff. Pot kettle. The purple-clad dugong shot back. That's different, Leo got careless, I'm just being a good teammate. Yeah, well, ack. Shell body. Donnie soared into the crowd, propelled there by a kick from the kangaroo. That was the last thing it did, as Leo swiped its hamstrings with his swords as he passed, joining Mikey and Raffi as they charged into the crowd after their teammate, tossing about any pirate with
on.
bad enough luck to be in their way. Not that Donnie especially needed the help. His staff was a blur, striking faces, necks, thighs, and all sorts of other soft spots. Already, he had a dead zone around him marked by bruised, unconscious bodies, and the pirates were calling up those of their number with guns. It was those gun-wielding pirates that the remaining dugongs slammed into like falling anchors, Mikey even pulling out his pistols and shooting up a knot of rifle-armed pirates. As such, he was the first one to notice the new problem. Boom! Nori Arts! He frantically yelped, swinging out of the way of a cannonball that had been ready to take his head off. Look out, guys, someone got the bright idea to wheel in a cannon. He glanced in that direction again. Correction, someone got the bright idea to wheel in a lot of cannons. Damn it. Leo cursed. Alright, I'm the fastest, so I'll see if I can go get at the gun crews. Can you guys hold on by yourselves? Raffi
Okay,
said nervously, her
yeah,
head
that's
tilted
the
up.
one I was
I don't
having
think we're gonna have
problems
to.
with.
The other three dugongs followed their sister's gaze. A moment later, all four of them were in the middle of a rip tide, and not a second too soon. While
Going
nothing was going to
to
upstage the
play
Straw
I
Hats
Am
grand
Future
invasion of the
again,
Golden
but I
Mines
have to
Palace,
read down
the sight of a
it,
group of
I
mismatched,
think.
thick gorged birds that had clearly been tamed from the archipelago's mutant menagerie carrying a galleon-sized ship over the palace was a close second. Even more so if one were to see that the
Yeah.
ones conducting the birds were a young girl that was communing with them without saying a word, and the rhinoceros-sized dragon she was riding, whose glare alone was enough to show why the birds were going against their fighting instincts. Of course, this was leaving aside that there were several others who sailed on board that ship that were just as scary as the dragon, if not scarier. The birds anxiously awaited word from the tamer below that they were free to fly away and never look back. The reason that the dugongs fled was not due to the birds, the girl, or the dragon. Rather, it was the fact that there was a galleon hovering above them, and it seemed as though it was about to boom, fall, and many a hapless man and beast never knew what hit them. Tita was all wince as they recovered from the shock wave of the dropped vessel. Suino and Mikey cursed and coughed in the same breath, waving his flipper in front of his muzzle in an effort to
Yo,
get
the
rid of the kicked up smoke.
Roblox
Did we just get
game
upstaged?
where you get
That's what you're
where you
focusing
dress
on.
up people.
Donnie groaned incredulously, shooting a glare at his brother through his teary-eyed vision. No, not really, Raffi assured Mikey. They're arriving late in the game after we already kicked things off. They're building off of us and all that, see? The female dugong pointed at the ship in demonstration. Her stance then became a bit more rigid when the girl and the dragon she was riding took off from the deck of the galleon and landed in front of a group of nearby soldiers that had been stunned into silence by the ship's appearance. Lindy, the girl, stated calmly, arms crossed as she regarded the soldiers with something akin to boredom. These men
Sorry for
planned on
taking
burning
so
down the East
long.
Blue.
Something
Your home and
came
mine,
up.
kindly cut loose. With inappropriate amounts of pleasure, milady, her dragon purred in a deep, rich, and rolling voice. After that, things got violent. Okay, that's just not fair, Mikey whimpered in despair. Neither Leo nor Raffi nor even Donnie objected to Mikey's assessment of the situation. How could they when they had to compete with an actual honest civic dragon? We're just awesome that way, sorry. The dugongs jumped and looked at the girl who at some point during the chaos had dismounted the dragon and had walked up to the dugongs. She rubbed her head sheepishly. Sorry, still not used to talking to animals verbally. I usually use my whisper fruit to talk straight to their minds. She explained before beaming and rocking back and forth on her heels. Anyway, I made Bez look out of the Bardo Club pirates. I met with one of you earlier, Donnie. We got that you were on our side when you said that Shiki threatened your home, Raffi snorted. Nice entrance, though. Hey, thanks. Ipes smiled eagerly as she rubbed her finger beneath her nose. But really, it was all Lindy. He's been having a lot of fun ever since he reincarnated, and we joined Barty and everyone else. Run, you little morsels. Run for your lives in my amusement. Nom nom nom. The dragon in question chortled as it chased after a horde of fleeing, everyone, to be honest, wings flapping like he was a Titanic. Green and furry chicken with a long neck. So not like a chicken at all, really. Ipes' smile twitched slightly as she watched the display. Mad, a little too much fun. You think? Donnie snapped incredulously. In all fairness, he did just reincarnate, after plodding along in his old body for the past few centuries. So I think he's a bit high on his youth right now, his reason. The dugongs all stared blankly at her before sagging in defeat. It says a lot about the past few months that we don't even question that sentence, doesn't it? Leo sighed. You, his siblings, all groaned in agreement. Oh. Nefertari Vivi was on cloud 9 as she marched down the corridors of Merveille like she owned the place. And she did. The only person who could threaten her was Shiki, and he was busy being chased by Luffy and Bartolomeo. With that in mind, as well as the lack of enemies nearby, she was mostly ignoring her surroundings in favor of practice with her powers. This took the form of swirling wind around her fingers, which was surprisingly hard. Working with so little air, getting it to go where she wanted instead of the wind's natural tendency to do what it wanted. But she was making progress as she passed another cross corridor, creating rudimentary shades with the air, and she glanced down the corridor.
Gonna have to
Oh, that's a
start I
cannon.
Am Future
She remarked, and her eyes
all
had just
over
enough time to widen in
again.
recognition right before said cannon fired, and the cannonball took her head off. For a moment, her headless body stood there, air visibly swirling above her neck. Then the air recoalesced back into her head, and she gave it a hearty shake. So that's what that feels like, she muttered, her mind still spinning a bit as her gray matter reformed from gas. Turning her gaze down the corridor, she stepped towards the cannon and its crew, who had just finished frantically loading another cannonball in its powder charge. Oh no, none of that. Holding up her hand, air swirled around it, wrapping around her arm. Sekhmet's might. At the call, a massive gust of wind burst forth, picking up and hurling the cannon off of its carriage, also bowling over the pirates surrounding it. But the
Hola,
cannon then went off, blowing a
Kupa.
hole in the wall, with salt in the wound. Pirates took one look at the load and now
Que
advanced
fue
towards
muy...
them, and then the direct cannon.
Lo
And as one
anunció
turned on
bien
the heel and sprinted
tarde.
the other way.
Ah!
Though she still followed them at a slow walk. A few minutes of such walking turned up the same group of pirates, but joined by a good dozen of their fellows, all armed with a musket and brace of pistols. There she is. One of the pirates, dressed a little more fancily than the others, shouted. Fire! A hail of gunfire tore down the corridor, with a similar result to shooting a shoebox. Well, a self-repairing shoebox. Made of sand. That was alive and kicking 9 kinds of you-know-what, let's just say not really a shoebox at all. You do realize that I'm Elodia, Vivi pointed out slowly, her head tilted questioningly. So unless you're packing sea stone ammunition, you're just waving a fan in a sandstorm, correct? The only response from the pirates was to pull out their pistols and keep shooting. Rolling her eyes, Vivi twisted up another wind, intoned Sekhmet's might, and launched it downrange. 6 pirates were hurled about, and the wind blasted a sizable hole in the wall. That still left quite a few pirates, albeit very nervous ones. And Vivi hummed, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Could use a bit better area of effect. Grinning, she produced a pair of miniature twisters in the palms of her hands. Time to practice. And thank you ever so much for volunteering. I assure you, your contributions will be noted. Her expression took on a feral quality. Posthumously, of course. If the way the goons all bolted was anything to go by, they were not keen on that idea. Vivi cocked her eyebrow as she watched the dust settle behind the terrified goons. Was that too much? After a moment of consideration, her grin took on an impish quality. Nah. And with that, the hunt was on. Oh. In a tunnel network beneath the palace parallel to the
Deep
plumbing,
Rock
one of Indigo's more recent creations
Galactic.
bounded down the hall with an annoyed, somewhat afraid expression on her face. A skeleton was sprinting after the beastie with an angry, very determined expression on its face. Or at least, it would have had one if it had a face in the first place. Oh. Metaskull joke. Will you shut up and run faster, you seen? I'll old coot. Bringing up the rear was a pompadour touting cyborg, who was glaring after them with a livid expression. Let's back up a bit. The mutated doe, which Indigo had altered at his captain's request a few weeks back to evolve more for speed than aggression, was running because Frankie and Brooke had specifically tried to capture it. Because strapped to its chest and a well-secured harness was Cross's snail transceiver along with a visnail. And the moment that they had tried to seize it, the doe bounded off through a twisting labyrinth of earth, air, and water that only the flow of flowed fruit could have created. Shiki had chosen speed over bulk to ensure that the creature would be easier to control than a simian majordomo, but at the same time impossible to defeat or at the very least to catch. Frankie fell behind quickly as the chase continued, Brooke maintaining pace for some time thanks to the unnatural lightness of his form, even allowing him to follow the doe across water. Ultimately, however, he met his match when the doe came across a lengthy chasm, blurred from view the moment she reached the edge, and reappeared on the other side a few moments later. Brooke skidded to a halt, gritting his teeth as he observed the length of the gap and the fact that it led right back to the blue sea. The doe faced him with a look that could only be the smuggest of satisfaction before bounding out of sight of the pirates. Cross will not be pleased with this development, will he? Brooke mused uncertainly. This whole place will cave in on itself when Luffy beats Shiki. We'll get the transceiver back after that, Frankie growled back, before turning around and trudging off towards the battle. Come on, if we can't get the snail's box, we need to be out there helping the others against the rest of those monsters. A far more eager smirk flashed across the cyborg's mug. And I've got just the plan for that. Oh. The doe bounded on for another few minutes until it was sure that it had left the pirates in the dust, whereupon it slowed down to regain some stamina. She also took the opportunity to scan the surrounding landscape for a stream. Indigo's stamina enhancements were effective. They sucked up water like nobody's business. Finally locating the scent of fresh water off in the distance, the doe leisurely trotted in that direction. though she kept all her senses on high alert in case the pirates had found some way across the chasm. She only let down her guard when she reached the actual stream. The only signs of life were a flock of mundane seagulls sitting on the surrounding branches. The doe shuddered. Both Shiki and Indigo had words about the fact that seagulls seemed blithely oblivious to the rules of Merveille. Very loud, very angry words. Whatever. The doe bent down to drink. They were just seagulls after all. Mine. The doe jerked her head up, ready to just a seagull on the rocks next to her. Wearing a cute little hat too. Bah, pointless. Back to drinking. Mine. This time, when the doe looked up, the seagull had produced a French fry, held in its wings. All her instincts blared at her that she was in danger, but it was a French fry. Mine. Slowly and with great trepidation, the doe looked back up at the tree-bound gulls. Every single one of them had its eyes on that French fry. Her gaze whipped back to the seagull next to her, expression screaming, "Don't you dare!" The gull tossed the fry right at her. Immediately, the doe was swamped by what seemed like every seagull on the Grand Line, all pecking and flapping and trying to land on her. Despite the ensuing confusion, she did notice when the weight of the transceiver on her chest suddenly vanished. Snorting, the doe shook off the last few seagulls and tore after the speck of white she could see flying away as fast as it could manage into a patch of forest. Why a seagull wanted the thing the Alpha had given her to keep was beyond her, but given the consequences of failing the psychotic ape, she was not letting it get away with it. Of course, there was one small problem with that idea.
That
the gull could
scene's
simply
from
climb above the
Finding
trees,
Nemo, I
while the doe had to
think.
slow down to avoid slamming into said trees. And yet, it simply didn't climb out of sight and fly away. The answer to this conundrum was obvious. It was taunting her. It had to be. The gull glanced over its shoulder down at her, and then waggled its tail feathers in a way that was somehow smug. Oh yeah, it was taunting her. Snorting angrily again, the doe picked up speed. Through hitting a tree, this was officially personal, she would plow through them if she had to. And even better, the trees were thinning out. Once she was out of the stupid forest, she could bound off one of the trees, get some altitude, and take down that stupid seagull. Bursting out of the trees, the doe prepared to execute her plan, only to hit a bit of a snag. A pirate mosh pit kind of snag. And she was currently sitting in midair. I don't want to be Venezuelan. Oh. Flying high above, Ku smirked at a plan well executed. That deer wasn't going to be a problem anymore. Now he just needed to get the transceiver to cross and... Wait. What the heck was that whistling? Snapping his head up, Ku let out a squawk of panic at the eagle diving towards him talons first, and immediately dove for the ground. That action probably saved his life. The eagle slamming into his neck from behind and driving him into the ground probably would have snapped his spine otherwise. Even then, both impacts served to knock Ku for a loop, and gave the bird of prey the time it needed to completely pin him to the ground with a single foot. A merry chase you led us on, he heard the eagle glow from on high. But now, your flight is at an end. Could you be any more cliched? Ku grumbled, only to grunt as the eagle ground his beak a little deeper into the dirt. Right, if that's how you're going to be, down to business then. The eagle sighed as it examined the talons on his free foot. Hand over the transceiver, and I will ensure that you are dead before stripping the flesh from your bones. Nice threat, but I'm afraid you've been outfoxed. Out the corner of his eye, Ku saw the eagle gain a hilariously surprised expression, whereupon he was knocked off the newsbird in a pained squawk and flurry of feathers. Sitting up, Ku watched the feather hole tumble for a bit in the dirt,
That's about
before
it.
he was suddenly pummeled into the ground by a blur of white slamming into the eagle, again and again and again,
And
until the
that
pompous
one.
hat topper was little more than a twitching pile of broken
I'll
bones
leave
and
the
feathers.
hunger
Her
on,
job done, Ku's
but
savior strolled up to him with her head held high and her tail waving daintily behind her. Her swider faltered as Ku cuffed her upside the head with his wing. I could have done without the awful one-liner, he groused, brushing the dirt from his wings before glancing up at Sue. But thanks for the save. Though how did you know to get here? You're welcome, Sue rolled her eyes with a derisive snort, rubbing her ear. And for your information, the slime ball directed me this way to get his box back. You actually saved me a lot of trouble on that front. The two animals fell silent for a moment, both of them processing the fact that they were speaking in their native
Let's
tones,
go.
and then looked up expectantly. Head for the throne room, but take your time, the voice of Audio God said grimly but distractedly. Cross and I have never been this mad before. And then he was gone. Ku cocked his eyebrow. Well, that makes sense. He then glanced at Sue out the corner of his
Oh,
eye.
I didn't get to do
And
this
convenient for you, I
last
expect.
time.
Sue shot her own clench-eyed glare at the gull, before sighing and scratching at her ear. All right, I suppose that's mostly fair, but... She snapped her head up and jabbed her upon Ku's breast. Let's be clear here. I can be dickish, and I was dickish in how I asked you for help, I'll admit. But that doesn't mean you're actually a dick, of course, Ku nodded without missing a beat. Don't worry, I get it. You'd just gone through hell when last we first talked. You were impatient when you talked to Windy, it's fine. Besides, who saved my tail feathers just now, so I'd say our tabs are about even right now to know. Sue pawed despairingly at her muzzle. Saved them while you were helping us out, so... Let's not get bogged down in that particular morass, all right. Ku waved her off. And, while I did decide to help you guys out while I was around, I flapped my way up here for another reason. The Cloud Fox's ear twitched slightly, and she snapped a shocked look as her pinched eyes allowed at the gull. Wait, you mean? The news Ku wavered his wing uncertainly. We dug up something. Whether or not it's useful, or even all that actionable, well, I'm a straw hat, remember? We've gone off of worse, Sue scoffed. Gimme, quickie! Well, alright, Ku sighed in defeat. Just don't say it, I didn't warn you when you don't like it. And so Ku told her what he knew, and Sue did indeed not like it. Oh, my, Shiki, you've been quite busy, Robin purred, thumbing through one of the many folders that she had found in the Golden Lion's library. I do believe that Cross is going to be immensely pleased with these reports on the Blues Marine bases.
I think
With
I
any
have
luck, some turnover of the chains of
light
command will be beneficial, to say the least. It did make sense that Shiki would ensure that there was no threat to his military might in those oceans. Forewarned was forearmed. As Cross himself had demonstrated many a time now, and Robin had a vested
I can
interest in
just
making sure
build
that her
them.
foster brother was well armed indeed. And the details in the folders, she read, promised to be quite useful to him and his. Now Robin hummed to herself as she cast a thoughtful gaze around the ornate bedchamber her myriad hands were in the process of ransacking, flinging books left and right and ripping boards from the walls. If I were a megalomaniacal self-zealot intent on world conquests, she trailed off for a moment, before smirking and thumbing the brim of her hat. Correction. If I were Crocodile, where would I hide my log of information on news? The archaeologist cut herself off with a pained yelp as she snapped her original hand to her left eye, which was clenched shut on account of the rivulets of blood streaming from the eyelid. Now I remember why I stopped using Ojo's Fluor in full-scale theaters. She groaned to herself, blooming another eye on her palm to see the damage. She frowned slightly, bloodshot and crimson, most likely a popped vessel, but she'd had worse and healed from it. Even if this would take a bit of time. With that done, she reordered her thoughts and focused on what had just happened. Robin took a swift inventory of her remote eyes, closing them as she went for her own peace of mind. In the end, all eyes were accounted for, except for the one I had, on this room's outer wall, Robin groaned, dragging her hand down her face. Oh, this is going to hurt, isn't it? Ook. Crash. Robin was proven right, much to her chagrin, by a massive hairy palm crashing through one wall, pancaking her against the wall opposite, leaving her with more than a dozen bones fractured and half as many outright broken. Chopper would not be pleased with her, and it said a lot about both her faith and her crew and their doctor's prowess and temper. That was the first worry that came to her mind. Or maybe it was just the concussion jumping up her priorities. Either way, when her senses returned to her, she found herself gripped tightly in the giant fist of a gorilla clad in red clothing, holding her very high off the ground. The first instinct of Robin's scrambled mind was to rip her captor apart with a multitude of arms. She barely managed to keep this instinct under control due to the height. She may have the means to slow her fall with her wing technique, but that technique needed more focus and less risk of being ambushed while she recovered than she had at the moment. As she ran through her other options, her eyes fell on the gorilla, and upon seeing the look in its eyes, she did the only thing she could at the moment. Someone get this damn dirty ape off of me, she shouted, shoving as hard as she could against the iron grip she was in, with as many arms as she could comfortably muster. DRRR, the gorilla growled menacingly, the other hand pulling back to do something to her. Ahem. Pirate and gorilla turned to witness a very specific aquatic mammal perched on the larger mammal's shoulder, nonchalantly smoking a cigar and giving the ape a flat look. You heard the lady. Let her go, boss said calmly. Predictably, the gorilla turned his eye on the dugong, instantly swatting his free hand down on the martial artist amphibian. Less predictably, the gorilla's palm halted directly before the dugong, whose flipper had stopped the larger beast's hand in its path. Said dugong now had a vein popping on his forehead. Let me clarify something for you, Simeon, the martial artist drawled. What I just said, that wasn't a request. Squall pistol. In the space of a second, Boss pulled back his flipper and jabbed it forward again. Crunch. Hoorah! Scarlet howled, flinging his captive aside in favor of cradling his broken hand. Boss immediately dove down, catching Robin in his flippers and setting her back down into the room she had been looking over before. Thank you, Boss, Robin said. Don't thank me yet, Boss said as he glowered past his friend's shoulder. Find whatever you were looking for and then get the hell out of Dodge. This isn't going to be a one-stop shop. I don't know how much this IQ he's had, but it's got to be a massive overdose. The archaeologist blinked in confusion. How can you be so sure? The dugong pointed his flipper without a twitch of his expression. Because while we Grand Line animals are freakishly tough, that is not typical of any natural evolution I'm aware of. Robin followed Boss's flipper with her eyes, one of which started twitching when she saw the, to reiterate, very unnatural occurrence which Boss was speaking of, namely the fact that the gorilla's hand was pulsating before her eyes, the shattered bones within shifting and restructuring themselves back into their proper shape. Robin nodded, shoving her hat down. Right. You have fun with that. Oh, believe me, Boss tilted his head just so, letting a vicious glint bounce off of the point of his glasses.
I know
I
I have, like,
The gorilla, meanwhile, howled and pounded its chest before ignoring Robin entirely as she escaped to bring his palm down on the floor. As he had intended to bring it down on Boss's head, this prompted a slow, stupid blink of confusion. Nori Arts, Boss intoned, reaching for something behind his back. Snarling, Scarlet brought his palms up again and slammed them down repeatedly. Nori Arts, Nori Arts, Nori Arts. And Boss merely swayed out of the way of each one of the room's shaking slaps. After the fourth, he flicked his flippers, sending something blurring towards his simian opponent. That something was his blazing rope dart, which slammed into Scarlet's gut with about as much force as a diable jam. Between the heat and the impact, for a brief second all the gorilla could do was hunch over wheezing in pain. It was a second Boss took full advantage of, looping the rope around Scarlet's neck and then jumping onto one of the roof beams. Riptide, the dugong intoned, blurring out of sight but up. Shell body.
I can get the
Reinforced dugong
modules
smashed
from
through the roof
there.
like so much sugar glass, carrying Boss onto the roof and yanking Scarlet along by the neck. For a moment, the two hung in the air. Tidal swim. Before Boss flipped in mid-air and kicked off with all his might. Once again, massive forces carried Scarlet along for the ride, neck first, and when Boss landed,
I want to
another
update
flick of his
that one
flippers
real quick.
unlooped the gorilla and sent him hurtling towards one of the towers, towering above the palace, and then into the tower. That should be enough, Boss muttered, eyeing the impact point. The rubble there shuddered. Or not. Sebek's scale-rotted tail that a psych, you is. Boss's words died in his throat as the top half of the tower shuddered, and then rose. And with the pink shirt Scarlet wore standing out in the blizzard-wrapped gloom, the cause was pretty damn obvious. You've got to be kidding me. With a shout of "Oh, Art Ray," Scarlet hurled the chunk of tower like a javelin at Boss, who knew immediately that he had no chance of blocking or deflecting it. And dodging would leave him open. Time to think a little laterally. Typhoon Lash. Boss roared, spinning on his flippers before unleashing the attack from his tail. It worked like a charm, neatly slicing the tower in two, at which point Boss hooked his rope dart around the top half and went along for the ride. Whereupon Scarlet peeked over the side. Okay, so you're not a complete meat, Boss muttered. Tugging his rope dart again, he swung around, aiming his free flipper for the gorilla's unprotected back. Squall pistol. Wook. Wham. The squall pistol landed, sending Scarlet staggering back, clutching his face. The punch Boss took in return sent him reeling, a 50-piece marching band practicing in his skull. Note to self, he groaned, shaking his head. Don't take hits unless you have shell body on. And maybe not even then. The last of the cobwebs cleared, and Boss turned back to Scarlet, who was also up and about and gaping in panic. The dugong looked behind just as the pillar slammed into the central dome of Shiki's palace. Shell body. Boss squawked, and a good thing too, as the sudden stop hurled him into the side of the building. Scarlet too, actually, which gave Boss an excellent view of what a gorilla ass looked like. Grumbling, Boss pulled himself out of the wall and glanced up at his opponent. Attack or reposition, he mused. Below him, the pillar shifted. Right, reposition it is. Spinning the head of his rope dart, he hurled it up, grasping one of the ledges, and then yanked himself up to land softly on the roof of the dome. No sooner had he landed than the dome shook. Oh, Riptide. Blurring away, he saw, through the haze of the technique, a massive gorilla fist punch through where he'd once been, followed shortly by the rest of the beast, still no worse for the wear. That called for a change in strategy. Let's see how you like ranged combat. Boss barked as he came out of his Riptide. Typhoon Lash. Super sharp wind gusted out, Scarlet dodging by a slim margin. Another followed that dodged as well, and Scarlet decided that he didn't like being shot at. Roaring, he charged Boss, who simply Riptided out of the way and repeated the process. This dance repeated 2 more times until Scarlet dodged another Typhoon Lash. This time, he was met with a rope dart to the face. Repeatedly. Got your dodgy pattern down, ape? Boss crowed, repeatedly swinging his rope dart. You're not escaping this. Suddenly, the dart stopped, and wouldn't budge no matter how much Boss tugged on it. That Scarlet was gripping the hook despite the flesh of his hand audibly sizzling probably had something to do with that. Uh-oh, Boss muttered, which was as far as he got before Scarlet gave the rope dart an almighty yank. A hasty typhoon lash cut the rope. He could retrieve the hook when he didn't have a 500 LB gorilla trying to bash his face in, but by the time he was done, a massive fist was heading for his face, and he had neither the time for a tidal swim nor the leverage for a Nori arts. This is going to hurt, chill body. The fist struck home, slamming Boss into the surface of the dome. Sensing blood, Scarlet didn't let up, slapping and punching the same spot repeatedly. Each shook the dome and caused a spider web of cracks to grow ever larger. Unfortunately, he didn't notice Boss simply roll out of the way of the blows, so the squall pistol that hit him in the chin came right out of nowhere. Grimacing, Boss watched the gorilla go down again, simply waiting for it to get back up. Even with shell body that had hurt, though nothing that would stop him from putting down this ape. Especially if... Yes, it was taking longer for Scarlet to get up. Quite a bit longer. Like I thought, Psyche regeneration can be used up, Boss remarked. And without that, well, you're strong. Stronger than me, even. But there's more to combat than just strength. Boss shifted his stance, drawing his arms together at his side. And I'm superior in every other way. Shaking his head, Scarlet narrowed his beady eyes at Boss before roaring and charging.
Frame.
6
I need
archers,
to
6 kings,
upgrade,
Boss murmured.
like,
6
so
kings for 6
fucking
oceans.
bad.
Deep within Scarlet's simian brain, he recognized that his opponent wasn't dodging. A small part screamed that this was a trap. The rest just wanted to get this pest out of the way. So he kept charging. Full shell style, 6 oceans gun. Wrapped up in all 6 styles, it was child's play for Boss to first weave between Scarlet's crashing fists, and then deliver the 6 oceans gun straight to his chest. Bones shattered and organs pulped under the force, the momentum sending Scarlet hurling through the air. TQ Fuel Regeneration went to work patching up the damage, but it was overtaxed by the rest of the fight, and running out of raw materials to work with anyway. Then the whole point was rendered moot when Scarlet hit the remaining tower. That was a level of damage the weakened regeneration simply couldn't cope with. Back on the dome, Boss eyed his handiwork, and when after a minute Scarlet didn't budge, let out a sigh of relief and sagged in pain, particularly his left flipper. Flexing tentatively, he winced as he felt his bones rub together just out of alignment. Annoying, but maybe he could subtly fix it while no one was. Crack! Son of a barnacle-lathered boy. Boss howled, clutching his shoulder in agony. What the hell? Take better care of yourself, she blubber, but Sanji interrupted, idly tapping the boot he'd used to kick the dugong's shoulder back into place. It'd be a damn shame if the only decent sparring partner I had on the ship was the Mosshead. Boss grit his teeth together before slowly looking at the nonchalant smoker and his gaunt companion behind him. His jowls slowly twisted into a wry smirk. Will do, Sanji. So, how many idiots do we have left to smash into pieces? Not enough to make it our main priority anymore, the gaunt man responded, fingering the heavy-looking tonfa he was carrying. Guess now we turn to the loot, pillage, and plundering part. Boss exhaled in what was almost a snort, but nodded. Fine by me, I'm satisfied after that fight. Except that I'm not, Sanji sorted out a cloud of smoke, glaring daggers at the downed ape. You did a pretty good job, but that damn thing dared to lay a hand on a woman. You should have beaten the gorilla way worse. Oh yeah? Boss cocked his brow at the cook. Well, he's certainly not going anywhere. Go ahead, finish what I started. I'll do just that, Sanji huffed, finding the downed ape still embedded in the remaining tower. Once he had calculated the appropriate amount of punishment to dole out, he hauled his leg back and kicked a rock that tapped off of Scarlet's skull. Now he's had it, the cook declared with a satisfied nod. Now come on, let's help our helmscroll steal everything that's not nailed down. And with that, Sanji ran off. Boss blinked after his crewmate before slowly looking up at Jin. Just confirming. Seeing as there was a big chunk of time before I met the band of mental patients I decided to shack up with, he pointed at Sanji's retreating back. Was he always this crazy? You'll need to be more specific, Jin deadpan. About women, or in general. Both. Well, in that case, no. When I first met Sanji, a smirk slowly spread across Jin's face. Honestly, I think it was just bubbling below the surface back then. Boss donned a smirk of his own. Good. 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 Boss started to waddle off with a contented nod. Means he's finally being honest with himself. Oh, though there were far more than 88 nutcases who had attacked the roaring, rampaging sword wielders that had come after the highest authority in the palace, the fallen bodies, the many homeless limbs, and the streaks and puddles of blood dyeing the room red would have given even a certain black mamba a run for her money. Were soundbite less incensed, he may have even pointed it out. Unfortunately, the furious rage was still there. And so were the enemies who somehow thought that they would succeed were hundreds before it failed to take down the 2 straw hats, tearing them to shreds. Adding to the misfortune was the not unsound logic that led them to keep trying. No matter how powerful they were, they could only handle so many bodies, both at once and over time. And while that was unsound logic against most of the straw hats, despite rumor to the contrary, the crew was still mostly composed of humans. As such, Cross's stamina was wearing thin, and Zoro. GRK! Zoro grunted in pain as another tremor racked his body, creating a split-second opening that a particularly persistent spearman shoved his weapon into. Thankfully, it was with the butt of the weapon, which allowed Zoro to dive right back in instead of fall to his knees clutching the new hole in his gut, but the slip-up was blatantly obvious. Keeping a strong face and acting like nothing's wrong is fine when the carnage is done. Not when we're still creating ground zero. Bite me. Zoro shot back. Calling up the aura of the Sura, he waded into the crowd, the flickering illusion carving through everyone in his path. And as for my personal armchair, Kiss, Cross, snarl, braining and burning an overeager mook with Lasso's smoking muzzle. My. He then caught another enforcer's blade with Funk Freed's tusks and used the lock to drive the enemy into a bone-fracturing headbutt. Ass. The final word was punctuated by Cross flinging Funk Freed and Lasso at his opponents. The 2 weapon animals transitioned in midair into a rhymed tusked elephant and a flame-spitting hound, respectively, smashing into the Golden Line's front lines and smashing them quite thoroughly, giving Cross the space and time he needed to catch his breath. Time he took to shoot and offended, his slightly dizzy look at Soundbite.
I need the hammer,
I'll have you know that I'm in peak physical condition,
hammer?
and that we are doing perfectly fine at breaking these bastards all on our boom. Cross's boasting died quickly when perhaps the worst possible scenario introduced itself into the fight. See, while Vivi blowing the roof off the palace did achieve the desired effect of intimidation by express fury, that left the fighters with invulnerable to attacks from above. And in this case, said attack took the form of one of Shiki's more fortuitous recruits. Said recruit was gray-skinned, bald, and slender with a mustache that was halfway between imperial and horseshoe, gray beard stubbles, a black and purple vest, a red sash, blue pants, pointed black shoes, clawed-knuckle dusters on his hands, and a scowl on his face. Ah yes, and he also happened to be 45 feet tall. Motherfu. Zoro growled. Move aside. The giant roared, stomping through the crowd, heedless of the allied pirates he crushed underfoot. I'll show you the true might of the Grand Line. The pirates who weren't stepped on may not have had sense enough to stop fighting a losing battle, but they at least had enough self-preservation instincts to not get in the way of someone who was towering above them. This good sense backfired hard when Cross and Zoro batted the retreating pirates aside like lint, leaving the area around them clear
Can
of
be
obstacles.
purchased in the
Still not
Echo
worried.
Mate
Soundbite
besides
asked flatly.
Earl from
The first and
5
third mate
nutritious
exchanged glances.
salads.
Like hell, they answered.
Oh, it can be
Zoro crossed
purchased in
Kaitsu
the
and Shisui
store?
next before him, flats facing outward. Cross ran toward him, jumping onto the blades. The swordsman's muscles bulged, and with a roar he uncrossed his arms and flung Cross upward away from the giant, instead impacting high up on one of the room's undamaged pillars. Cross reached out, metal-encased fingers digging into the wood of the pillar. The giant sneered, betraying his brawn-to-brains ratio, as fast as
Do I
Cross was
finally
going,
have it now?
into the pillar or his arm should have broken. With great hypocrisy, he bellowed, "Your brains are as small as you are. You missed. Now you die." Then he simply swung his blade-enhanced fist at the smaller pirate, and Cross leaped again to avoid the blow. Landing on the giant's arm, he ran up, reared back his right hand, and slammed his palm into the giant's face with all the force he could muster.
I thought I got it.
Impact, along with all the force he had just absorbed. The giant reeled, stunned but still on his feet and not liable to go down anytime soon. And just for kicks. Cross snarled, flexing his palm again, and firing half a dozen more blasts of kinetic force in the giant's face. That was more than the giant could take, his head snapping back from the sheer impact, his knees buckling under him. Like some titanic tree that Paul Bunyan had taken an axe to, the giant tilted back and collapsed, shaking the entire building on impact. "Siege," Zoro scoffed dismissively as he walked up to the downed opponent. "Still worried about this wimp." "Yano, I would say I wasn't and never was." Soundbite sighed, slumping his eye stalks in resigned defeat. "If only I couldn't hear the fact that he's still awake." Cross and Zoro snapped incredulous looks at the snail. "What? Grarg." The giant cut off any response
I
soundbite
need
could have made by suddenly
reinforced
shooting back to his feet and
hammer.
batting Cross and Zoro aside with a single, almost offhanded sweep of his arm. "Cross." The Zoan weapons cried in concern, breaking off from their assaults at the sight of their wielder being sent flying. Cross grimaced, eyes clenching in preparation for the impact that was to come, but what actually came was most unexpected. He slammed hard into something, yes, but it was something that was soft like a cloud, and yet at the same time somehow as firm as iron. And it was massive and moving to set him back on his feet. He realized exactly what was going on long before he set eyes on the one controlling the clouds, who was standing at the exit of the room where Shiki had departed. "You morons," the Straw Hat's second mate scoffed with a shake of her head, not even sparing the pair a glance as she casually observed the room. "Remind me, who's supposed to be saving who here?" I don't know, the third mate responded with a frown that didn't quite seem convincing as he tried to push himself out of the cloud, though the footing wasn't giving him any luck, and most
I
likely not
have
by
it
chance.
though.
We're here
Why
to rescue someone who's going to catch
aren't you
absolute hell
letting
for
me
being a
use
bonehead
it?
once we're free and clear. "What about you?" A pair of Jaxes with no sense between them. Nami finally turned her head to the pair to give them a catty grin. "Sounds like we both have horrible jobs, doesn't it?" "Not as bad as them," the first mate snorted, gesturing to the giant and the remaining mooks who were getting their footing and nerve back. "And if you're here to save us, how about finishing this?" The bloodthirsty pirate hunter conceding a group of opponents to the elegant Wetter Witch. She purred, her expression taking on an especially malevolent gleam. "Oh, how the mighty have fallen. The ones that fell ain't the mighty ones, and more than 80% are already down. You're just sweeping away the scraps." Soundbite snarked. "Snark later, zap now." Cross demanded, staring at the pirates who were aiming their guns at them. "I have something else in mind, actually," Nami said, spinning a portion of her climatet at her side. "Let's see if this works." She snapped her arm up and flung a cool ball skyward. Glacial tempo. Thunk crash. The giant was not getting back up this time. Not with a hailstone as big as his head squatting on his skull. Not skipping a beat, Nami made a few more movements with her staff. And now, Nami hummed to herself, spinning her full climate tact at her side, and causing a new offshoot of her eyes and aura to split off and form a sphere of clouds. The clouds roiling and churning. A weather forecast for all listeners. Exercise extreme caution in today's ventures, as a wind god has been sighted roaming the environs of Merveille. This deity is extremely dangerous, and has been noted to have a penchant for loosing holy hailstorms of
I
pure
need
wind.
coal,
If by some chance you manage to attract this deity's
metal
gaze,
pipe,
then this
and
whether
3
woman's professional
plastic
opinion.
bottles. I
Nami's
think
face
I have
became a mask
metal
of frigid
pipes.
fury as she jabbed her staff at the rapidly panicking pirates. "You are royally fucked," she declared. Divine tempo, Aeolus ire. The ball of cloud split open, and a gust of wind blasted out from its cradle. A gust so strong, it was like the divine bent to Nami's will. The entire back half of the main hall was blown clean off its foundation,
Coal
and the
plastic
pirates along with it.
bottles.
It didn't matter how big or small they were, how tired or fresh. All were swept aside as though some greater entity had just decided to brush them aside like so much dust. The male officers of the Straw Hats could only gape at the devastation wrought by their compatriot. So engrossed were they, in fact, that they barely even reacted as Nami's eyes and tempo retracted and deposited them on the splintered ground. Ah, the power rush! Nami practically shivered as she balanced her staff across her shoulders, tapping her fingers along its length. "I'll never get tired of it, you hear me? Never." Cross, never one to be left speechless for long, rebooted his brain first. "I can imagine how you feel, but at the same time, I don't think everyone is going to be so appreciative. Watch out for your crew when you're doing an AL like that, which..." Case in point, Cross set his lasso and Fonk. Freed burst free of the rubble that was once the remainder of the room. Literal steel in the glares that they fixed on Nami. "Oh, come on, it's not like you two aren't
Let's
literally as tough as nails," Nami
go.
shamelessly purred. The beast weapons promptly reversed to being perfectly cordial, blushing and scratching the backs of their heads. "Aw shucks," Lasso chuckled. "Well, when you put it like that," Fonfrey
Okay,
giggled.
20
"Morons for both of you,"
coal.
Soundbite rolled his eyes. "Morons or not, you can't deny they're still pretty damn useful," Cross reprimanded with a light grin, picking up his newly reverted weapons and sheathing them on his back and side. He then glanced back at Nami. "And as pissed as I still am at you for your bullshit, I can't deny it's good to have you back too." Nami blinked at Cross before shaking her head and waving him off. "I'll deal with whatever the hell you're talking about later. For now," she jerked her thumb over her shoulder, a particularly demonic grin spreading over her face. "Mind following me and helping me utterly ruin what little of Shiki's day has been left intact?" The way that Cross and Zoro grinned back was answer enough.
Okay,
Shiki
I
flew down the halls of Merveille,
need
occasionally dodging a rubber fist or busting a hole in the wall or floor or
plastic
sealing a fly around the
and
shimmering barrier that boxed him in.
scrap metal.
Contrary to appearances, he wasn't really running away. The confined corridors of his palace simply didn't provide the most advantageous battlefield against the Straw Hat Brat and his unexpected companion. The barriers were a constant reminder of that. Out in the open, though, well, then they would die. The one fly in the ointment was that he did have a few other loose ends to tie up before killing those two, and they were doing a good job at sticking to his tail like glue. What he needed was a diversion. A grin spread on Shiki's face as he recalled a certain gambit he'd used on Garp more than once back in the day. Yes, it would do nicely, especially since his pursuers definitely took after the hero in temperament. And so, picking up speed, Shiki shot out of the palace and immediately ducked behind a corner before stripping off his jacket. A simple application of the float fruit, and the jacket shot off deep into the floating islands, well away from both his hiding spot and where he needed to go. After a few seconds later, stomping feet and voices rewarded him. Damn. Where did he go? There. Floating off way over there. Applause. Wait, how are we going to follow him? Let me try something. Curious despite himself, Shiki glanced around his hiding spot to see Straw Hat and Sharktooth jumping after his coat on platforms made from shimmering barrier. Perfect. Puru. Of all the times. Shiki hissed, withdrawing a snail from his pocket and pointing it at the nearby wall. One of his skilled navigators appeared on the view, looking rather nervous. Navigation to Captain Shiki. Come in, Captain. It's urgent. It had better be, or else your head's going to part ways with your body. Shiki snapped. The navigator cowered fearfully. Yes, sir, we need to turn toward the east. Florm is coming. Oh, that's just what I needed, Shiki grumbled, giving an offhand gesture of acknowledgement before making to terminate the connection. Then he paused and turned a more attentive eye on his navigator. By the way, while I have you, what's the damage thus far? The gulp he got wasn't reassuring. At all. Ah, with all due respect, I don't think I can say anything good, Captain. All of the Straw Hats are still going strong, the prisoners have escaped, Doctor. Indigo and Scarlet have both been defeated, the snail transceiver has been stolen, and the daft green barrier has been destroyed. And the palace, the cyborg, and the skeleton hijacked a group of the monsters and have been strung up like motorcycles. They're tearing the whole palace apart. Murder sang in Shiki's heart, but he could still salvage everything that he needed to. First, however, he had revenge to deal with. Where is the witch? He growled. She's in the throne room with Jeremiah Cross and Roronoa Zoro, but they look like they'll be moving on any moment. Moving on to the next world, that is, Shiki snarled, terminating the connection and flying back the way he came as fast as he could, barely sparing enough attention to heed his navigator's request to redirect the islands to the east. The Golden Lion scanned the flaming wreckage of his palace
Auntie Agatha Superstore can be found by going on an expedition in the business center after upgrading the smart tower to level 2. She has
but he came up
some
Snake Eyes and instead came upon the half-collapsed husk of the throne room first. A husk filled with utterly defeated pirates at that. Shiki's already trenched deep scowl twitched violently as he took in the supposedly best and deadliest pirates in all of Paradise. Pirates he had personally chosen to act as his soldiers to represent him, laid low by a band of pathetic, worthless, East Blue weaklings. You. Incompetent. Scum, Shiki hissed, if only for his own benefit. Then, without a trace of concern, he shot his arm out to the side, gathered up a goodly mass of the fallen snow, and coalesced it into a snarling lion's head hovering above the hall. I will burn the East Blue, the Golden Lion swore imperiously, as though delivering a mandate.
The memory module's rare component that can be found after talking to the first android
shone in Shiki's eyes as he dropped his arm,
and purchased at Agatha's store.
Not trash like you.
It is used for upgrading the workbench and resource printer.
Intent on shredding each and every last one of the traitors who had so stupidly forfeited their right to live by selling his reputation. And the construct would have achieved its goal too had Shiki's age-old instincts not suddenly blared to life, prompting him to snap his arm out and backhand some kind of explosive ordnance away from him, halting the lion's descent in the process. Quite unfortunately for Shiki's framed and non-existent temper, he didn't have to wonder where the projectile had come from. We'd really prefer if you didn't do that if you don't mind. Shiki snapped his attention down towards the source of that voice, and indeed it was exactly who he expected. The annoyance. Jeremiah Cross and his pet, the captain's mutt, Roronoa Zoro, and her. Before he could deal with the traitor, however, Cross's ever-present leer quirked up into a direct taunt. It might sound counterintuitive, but the thing is, our crew prefers to leave our enemies alive. Let you bastards stew in your failure, see. So, he spread his arms invitingly, his mutt cannon weighing heavy on his arm. If you could do us all the massive favor of shoving off. Or just lay down and die, if you don't mind, Nami invited with a frigid smile. That'd be great. To make a very long and simple story short, something in the back of Shiki's mind snapped. You first, he rumbled, and his line redirected itself at the Straw Hat officers. It was close, so close to chomping down on them and ripping them to shreds, but alas, not close enough. Gun barrier cannonball, because he had to suddenly rip apart the snow golem in order to throw up a snow barrier to stop the ballistic rubber man that was flying at him. And then, before he could crush the persistent little brat, a cackling ball of shimmering energy barrier plowed through the snow like it wasn't even there, hitting him full body and jarring every bone in his body. Momentum transferred, Shiki hit the ground and skidded, the impact giving him something to focus on. And none too soon. Gear second. Gum Jet X. He got his wits back just in time to shoot away from a red-skinned, steaming Luffy, or more accurately,
I can
his sandaled
dismantle
foot,
him.
which neatly obliterated the section of ground where Shiki's head had been a half second before. Floating upright again, Shiki scowled mightily when he found that Luffy and Bardo had put themselves in between him and that traitor. Their intent clear. Fine, he bit out. You want to die first. I can oblige that. Luffy glared right back. But when he opened his mouth, it wasn't to Shiki. Cross. He'd ripping the place, snatch everything not nailed down, rip up what is, then set the place to blow into UFO. The loud mouth ventured. Go. Go in. And with that, the three mates hightailed it out of there. Shiki didn't pursue. So he would be doing things out of order. Whatever. He could take out his frustrations on the two people who had oh so kindly put themselves in his way. Slowly, he began to float higher into the air.
Foam
Black Bart
panel,
Bartolomeo, for the first time since Luffy and company had arrived on Mervay, felt nervous. The reason was that slide maneuver Shiki had pulled off to evade Luffy Senpai's Gum Jet Axe. If he could pull something like that on a dime, well, Bardo knew he wouldn't be matching that maneuver on his barriers, even on his own. Supporting Luffy on top of that. Hopeless. That's a problem, Luffy, he pointed out as Shiki continued to rise. Yeah, I need a better platform, Luffy agreed. High above, Shiki flicked his leg, an arrow flying down towards them. It splashed off of Bardo's barrier, Luffy responding with a jet pistol. Unfortunately, the punch didn't reach Shiki before it started to arc down. Yeah, haha. Shiki cackled. Too bad, boys. Gritting his teeth, Bardo jumped up and onto his barrier, then pushed off, canceled the first, and jumped to a new one. He repeated this many times until he get to Shiki's height, at which point Shiki merely floated above the haymaker Bardo threw, and then floated down and slammed his knee right into Bardo's gut. Stunned, the pirate ragdolled down until he hit the ground hard enough to embed his silhouette in it. Well, that didn't work, he groaned, scratching his mohawk miserably. Come down here, bastard. Luffy roared, glaring hellfire at the object of his ire. Surprisingly, however, it was not Shiki who responded. Hey, do you think I could lend a hand? Luffy blinked clean out of his jet-enhanced state as a brand new voice interrupted his train of thought, and he looked up to discover a familiar entity perched on a nearby eave. Billy. The rubber man gaped. The Electrofowl glanced skyward at Shiki before looking back at Luffy with a shaky but determined frown. I ran away with Nami. I ran away at the village, and if I run away now, I know I'll never stop. And so I'm not running away anymore. Billy hopped down next to Luffy and extended his wings, staring upward in fierce defiance. I'm not running away from my fears anymore and charging headlong at them. Though, Billy shot a shaky sidelong grin at the rubber man. I don't quite have the firepower for that. Think you could help me out with that? It only took Luffy a second to make his decision, and once he did, he grinned eagerly and hopped on Billy's back. Hell yeah. Bartolomeo, however, was notably more resigned in his enthusiasm as he gave the duck a once-over. He tentatively raised a finger. Don't suppose you've got some spare seats on you or something? Or you could always take your own ride. Bardo spun around at the voice behind him, then blinked slowly, wondering how the hell 2 tons of dragon had snuck up on all of them. He gave the dragon a once-over before doing the same to the duck, and ultimately, he came to a simple conclusion. Mine's bigger. Shiki's, still unclobbered, Luffy pointed out. Message received, getting on the fucking dragon. Bardo crowed, doing just that. Luffy hopped onto Billy's back, and then they were soaring into the sky after Shiki. And they weren't the only ones who took to the skies. With phrases such as your master will prove who is really the strongest, and I'll deafen you at minimum. And this time there's Jack, all you can do about it, ringing in their ears. Every last one of the Golden Lion's golden eagles took to the increasingly stormy skies. They and their snail submitting to the voice of anarchy and ensuring that Shiki got exactly what he wanted, all the world watching him. Oh, well, it looks like his monopoly on aerial combat just expired, Helmeppo said with a smirk. Feeling bold, Helmeppo. Garp asked with a hint of warning. Either Shiki loses or the East Blue dies. I'm not going to apologize for hoping that it's the first one that happens, the apprentice responded. Garp considered that and shrugged. Fair enough. On screen, Bardo and Luffy and their respective mounts closed in with Shiki, the odd duck-like bird soaring ahead. The feed abruptly switched to one closer to the action, allowing the Marines to watch as Luffy threw himself off Billy, fist reared back. Naturally, Shiki lazily floated above the punch, at which point Luffy spun in mid-air and with a cry of gum-gum spear, launched his clapped-together feet into Shiki's gut. Oh, and then Shiki was squashed against a barely visible barrier. All present winced. Billy snatched Luffy out of the sky a moment later, leaving Shiki to try and slice up Bardo instead. The attack, however, splashed against a new barrier, and with that the combatants were on the move again. Vice Admiral. Garp and Helmeppo looked at Kobe, who was staring at the screen in confusion. With how much experience Shiki has, he has to have Haki right. He asked hesitantly. So why isn't he using it against Luffy and Blackbark? That attack Luffy did, the kick to the gut. Either observation or armament Haki would have countered that move. So, does he not have it? He does, but it doesn't matter. All eyes turned towards a grim-faced Sengoku. Everything that this man is doing, he's doing because of his lingering grudge against Roger. His shame from losing to a man from the weakest sea in the world. Now the man who is increasingly considered his successor has stepped up against him, and he's only in paradise. The Golden Lion has long since missed his chance in his mind to use Haki to beat the Straw Hats. The 2 apprentices looked confused, and Garp took over. There are only 2 reasons that someone proficient in Haki would use it against someone who can't use it themselves. Their opponent is so far beneath them there's no point in dragging out the fight, or their opponent is too strong to win without going all out. Shiki has had too many chances to snuff out the Straw Hats at this point. Now that it's come to the crunch, the entire world is watching him. And Luffy has surpassed any expectations he had. If he went all out at this point, he might win indeed, but in spirit it'd be a complete defeat. He'd never forgive himself if he resorted to Haki to win against a couple of rookies from the weakest sea. So he's left with his wits and his devil fruit. The Vice Admiral grinned wryly. And something tells me that that's just not going to be enough to beat my stupid grandson. Sengoku sighed, removing his glasses and massaging the bridge of his nose, eyes squeezed shut. So I'm reduced to hoping that the Straw Hat pirates, who have caused me more stress than anyone in my life, will be able to defeat Golden Lion Shiki and prevent a massacre in the East Blue. I am conflicted. Opening his eyes to give Garp a glare, Sengoku said flatly, too old for this shit, and conflicted, yes. Garp chuckled to himself. Well, I won't deny that I wish it was us handing him his head like the good old days, but if this is the only way, then there's only one thing for me to do. Sengoku knew that he should have turned around and not given Garp another look for the rest of the night. Unfortunately, as the image of the snail was in one place, it left him vulnerable to the sight just within his peripheral vision. Garp raising a large foam finger with East Blue #1 written on it, and his 2 apprentices doing the same. He groaned even as they began cheering like cheerleaders. He groaned more as the image of Garp in a cheerleading outfit crossed his mind. That would be taking the place of Ekinu taking over for him as Fleet Admiral in the Screaming Nightmares rotation. Current maneuvering phase only lasted a few minutes, but that was long enough to take the combatants into the outer islands of Mervey. And Shiki wasted no time demonstrating why he'd taken the fight out there.
Excuse me.
He came to a stop and threw both hands out to the side. Bardo and Luffy had only the barest of warnings, the sounds of splintering wood and rock before a hail of stone shrapnel and splintered tree trunks shot off the nearest islands like the world's largest shotguns. Bartolomeo immediately threw up a barrier to halt the trees, but his attempts to curve it around were agonizingly slow. So, Lindy and Billy did the only thing that would save them. They went vertical. Unfortunately, being neither psychic nor experienced to the point of near psychicness with each other, they went in different directions. Billy flew down, Lindy flew up, which was what Shiki wanted the whole time. The speed with which he dove for Billy meant nothing else. Shit. Lindy dive. Bardo whirred the minute he saw that. Luffy, of course, tried to counter with a gum-gum gatling, but Shiki once again smoothly flowed out of the way of the attacks and stuck out one leg, dive-bombing the Straw Hat. Billy dodged, and then Shiki borrowed Luffy's earlier trick by spinning and launching an arrow back up at his opponent that splashed against the barrier. But this time, Shiki didn't get angry. He instead spun again and launched another arrow at Bardo, with his barrier still protecting Luffy, and Lindy already committed to the dive and unable to easily pull out. It seemed like he would take the full brunt of the attack, but it was not to be. Gritting his teeth, Bardo jumped off Lindy's back at just the right angle to let the hook carve a nasty gash in his side rather than let his belly open. Diving down, he reared back his own fist. Shiki evaded, of course, which was when Bardo rematerialized his barrier and jumped off of it, planting his fist in Shiki's cheek right as Luffy, red and steaming again, slammed his foot into Shiki's ribs. The Golden Lion staggered, fell several feet, but it was not long before he again caught himself and soared around to go and attack again. Large rocks ripping themselves off a nearby island to orbit around him. Luffy didn't wait, tapping Billy to charge straight at him, leaving Bardo behind to get back on Lindy. The past and present of the pirate age rumbled towards each other like armored knights in a joust, closing at frankly painful velocities. But a direct clash was not to be. The ring of rocks orbiting around Shiki suddenly switched to shooting themselves straight at Luffy. And while Luffy himself, with his rubber body, could weather an attack like that no problem, Billy was made of much less ductile flesh. Gum Jet Gatling! Luffy roared. His fist lashed out and smashed the rocks into gravel that harmlessly brushed off of both him and his mount. And then Luffy spun around, just in time to take a sword to the gut, grunting in pain. End of the line, brat. Shiki roared, bringing his other leg around to chop Luffy's head off. Instead, Luffy caught his opponent's leg, and to the Golden Lion's dismay, the grip was ironclad. Luffy's other hand, meanwhile, was shot behind him. Gum gum. Frantically, Shiki slid his other leg blade out of Luffy. Jet bullet. Coming through. Too late. Luffy's fist hit Shiki square in the nose, and half a second later, Bardo slammed into him from behind, cowcatcher-shaped barrier raised once again. The Golden Lion shot off into the distance. A third of the Supernovas, the first Pirate King, the next one too, and the birthplace of all three crews at once and currently are punting your tail. Not bad for the weak at sea, huh? Bardo shouted after him. Perhaps fortunately for Shiki, the time it took him to recover from the blow and regain his wits prevented him from hearing Bartolomeo's taunt. When he had his head straight again, he didn't go on the offensive or start another gambit. All that had gotten him were 2 wounds, albeit serious ones, and a collection of contusions for himself. What am I doing trading punches with them? He mentally demanded. Some need to prove his superiority. Raw rage that needed to be expressed. Well, whatever the reason, he was done with it. Now he would be fighting smarter. The facts were thus, close combat devolved into mutual exchanges, something the rookies were better suited to handle. Because there were 2 of them, and for no other reasons. Black Bart was covering Straw Hat, he needed to get both at once. And Straw Hat kept charging after him. Shiki glanced down at the island below. Perfect. Drawing on the power of the float fruit, Shiki fired off more impromptu projectiles at the pair. They missed or were blocked, but that wasn't the point. The point was that Straw Hat and that stupid P-Duck were now flying straight at him again. Surreptitiously lowering one hand, Shiki levitated a large ball of water out of the small lake below him. And then when Straw Hat was close enough, he sped it up. The look on Straw Hat's face when the water engulfed him was a soothing balm to his embittered soul, as was the shock yell Black Bart let out. Granted, the bubble barrier the traitor had managed to create around the 2 of them, preventing them from immediately drowning, was annoying, but from the water leaking cracks, that would not last long. Jihagiahaha! He cackled, floating his way around the ball of water as he basked in the glory of his victory, the glory of the brat's defeat. You think you can come here to my island, my kingdom, and do whatever you want, him? You brats! You rookies! You fake pirates! Shiki's already present smirk widened as the brats froze in their panicking, their attention locking onto him. That had gotten their attention something fierce. You actually listening for once? He asked mockingly. Good, then open up your ears. Shiki swept his arms out wide. Let me educate you on just how the world truly works. Oh, it's really quite simple, you know. So simple even a pair of total morons like you can understand. The strong rule over the weak. Shiki raised his palm before his face, fingers clenching and unclenching menacingly. We in the world who have power, we who stand head and shoulders above the weak, are granted this ability because we are worthy. Because we are inherently better than our lessers. To take what we want when we want, solely because we want it and because we have the ability to take it. This is our right. The right of the worthy. Shiki's hand snapped into a fist. The right of the strong. A murderous growl erupted from neck. Drake's throat as he snapped his titan-sized jaws at the screen, positively itching to tear his fangs into the real thing rather than a simple simulacrum. Because right then, in that moment, there was truly nothing Drake desired more than to devour the monster who so thoroughly reminded him of the other monster that had slaughtered the first family he knew in his life. Or perhaps more accurately, he wanted to slaughter the monster that reminded him of his first family, full stop. Bottom line, Drake wanted Shiki dead. And he wasn't alone. Oh, and as for the weak, Shiki's leer turned sadistic. The only right they have is to be crushed beneath the might of the strong. Serve at the back and call the ones whom they have no right to stand against, whom they should face with the utmost reverence by having the utter benevolence to allow them to set foot upon their dominion day by day, and then to perish as soon as it would benefit the strong ones best. The world is full of weaklings who will never amount to anything, a waste of space and breath for those who can make so much better use of it. The only worthwhile thing they can do with their existence is serving and nourishing the strong. That son of a bitch. A good number of incredulous eyes turned toward the punk-like speaker. He met them with a scoff. You honestly think I can put up with this? Please. He waved his hand dismissively. I'm no hypocrite, I agree with what he said about strength. I don't have a problem with killing. I don't have a problem with pillaging and burning. It's how I live my life, and it's how I'm going to reach for one piece. Kid glared bloody murder at the screen. But, blind reverence. And this chicken should having the utter gall to demand it. Kid's fist split the wood of the table. Fuck that. I want enemies, or I want loyalty in both ways that shit's earned. This asshole. He wants a flock of sheep. Loudly clearing his throat, Kid spat the resulting loogie right onto the screen. Makes me fucking pissed off that I'm lumped in with him. Oh, and the strongest of all in the world. Why, there's no doubt about it. Shiki flung his arms wide with a mad cackle. It is us pirates. We who fly our own flags and allow no limitations to hinder us. We who cast off the shackles of the world and our nations and ourselves. There should be no doubts, no misgivings. We pirates, we conquer storms that send the meek fleeing for the shores. We defy all who stand in our way, be they beast or man. Shiki soared above the bubble, his face a rictus of rage as he glared down towards the world below. We face all dangers without hesitation. We sail beyond the horizons that the meek dare not cross. There can be no doubt about it. Shiki shot his finger downward. I tell you now the truth I told that fool Roger all those years ago. The sea belongs to US and US alone. And I, as king of the pirates, will be the strongest man in the world. The ocean will belong to me. Jahaha. 20 years of isolation has clearly not done the man's sanity any favors, the greatest swordsman in the world dryly stated, one hand reaching for a glass of wine. Honestly, a veteran of the New World should know better than to assume he could actually get away with something like this. You know, up until that last line, I was actually prepared to agree with every word he said. The youngest of the 4 emperors concurred. A jug of sake in hand. That you've got the right of it, Hawkeyes. He's completely lost it. He lost it when the captain died by a hand that wasn't his, brat, if not long before that, the Dark King groaned into his cup. The world's just seeing it on display for the first time. The 3 men exchanged looks, the same emotions between them, and drank deeply from their respective vessels. So, are you ready to set out then? Mihawk posed, cracking his neck in preparation. Shut up, Shiki! Their attention redirected at the screen as an infuriated roar shook dust loose from the rafters. Not yet. We'll see this fight to the end first, Shanks said firmly. I expected nothing less, the swordsman sighed. You still hold the hope that your protege can triumph over one such as Shiki. You just said it yourself, his pride has inflated to the level of insanity. The younger superhumans turned to the older, who was studiously observing the fight. He has the willpower, the potential, and he's not alone. All of that gives him a chance against Shiki. Oh, it happened all at once. Rather than collapsing, Bardo dropped his barrier of his own free will, so that at the exact same time, Luffy could throw a punch at Shiki. Into the shock of everyone watching, his hand managed to shoot out of the bubble, grab Shiki's collar and haul himself out of the aquatic prison, laying a punch on his opponent. There wasn't much force behind it, but the Golden Lion's face still twisted in pure incandescent rage. Well, more so than before. Accursed brat. Shiki roared, bringing up one of his legs. Counterintuitively, Luffy simply let go and then punched the empty air to his left. Those few viewers with training in the Six Powers recognized the half-assed moonwalk for what it was. Everyone else was simply left gobsmacked by Luffy punching the air to dodge. This included Shiki. That was when Bardo and his dragon blindsided him. Rookie and Legend slammed together, Bardo's barrier shimmering between them as Lindy gave him the velocity he needed to knock Shiki out of the sky. Gathering his wits, the veteran slipped out from under Bardo, only to catch Luffy's sandal blasting him in the face. Stars burst in his eyes as he flew back, taking the time that he needed to regain his sight. He turned his gaze back on them, and then his vision faded again as a blinding, crackling blur seared across his vision. A Valkyrie, he exclaimed, open-mouthed. Not far off, you bastard. With Nami's voice in his ears, Shiki snapped back to Furious. What have you done, witch? Tonight's weather forecast for Merveilles showers, thunderstorms, and cyclones, with a 100% chance of the entire archipelago falling back to the sea where it belongs, drowning and crushing every last monster that the last 20 years have spawned. This could have been avoided had a certain lion bastard realized that his navigator was being held at gunpoint to lie to him, and laid his base into certain destruction. And now here's Luffy with the news. You've lost, Shiki. Luffy roared, slamming his knuckles together. You only wish, Shiki drawled, spreading his hands. At first, it seemed as though nothing was happening. Then Nami spoke up again. You're lowering the islands. She gasped in horror. And you call me an idiot, he responded with cold smugness. My powers will uphold these islands until the day I die, but I will admit that if too much force from the Grand Line's weather struck an island and sent it falling, my weapons would perish. But thanks to your warning, we are now at an altitude that should ensure that at least the strongest of them will survive. Any further advice, baby girl? Luffy? Rake him. Wano, Zoro, and Jeremiah Cross's voices spoke alongside Nami's for the final words, and their captain raised his head with a ferocious scowl. You were wrong, Shiki, Luffy said firmly. Oh. Shiki's entire being twitched at the accusation, and he shot a positively evil look at the other pirate. Care to run that by me again? He rumbled, a vein pulsating on the side of his neck. Straw Hat shook his head in disgust. You've had your head in the clouds for so long that you've forgotten all about the sea. It actually shows just how stupid you are. You can fly and you don't even realize the most important thing in the world. You talk about strength like it's everything, but it's nothing compared to freedom. You say that the ocean belongs to you. Belongs to pirates. Luffy flung his arm out in denial. You're wrong. The ocean, it belongs to everyone. There's nothing standing in the way of sailing from your home to the end of the world. You're free to go wherever you want to go. No matter what comes our way, no matter how much it hurts, we can still sail on. The point of being a pirate isn't to be strong. Luffy spread his arms and bared his teeth in bestial defiance. Pirates are free. That's why I'll become the king of the pirates. So that I can be the freest man in the world. Me, not you. In a relatively new secondary commander's office in the fortress of Navarone, an imposing violet-haired man let out a low growl in response to the rookie's words. The words that, almost against his will, cracked ever so slightly through the cloud of hatred that the kid pirates had cast over him, and allowed him to look upon the rubber kid with something other than loathing. But it was only hearing him say those feelings of the sea, the feelings that he himself agreed with, that caused non-loathing to grow into what he was barely able to consider respect. Behind him, his most loyal lieutenants had softer expressions as they too observed the fight between the two pirates. He's different, isn't he? The woman mused. She rolled her eyes as her comrade snapped accusatory looks at her. He's still a pirate, I'm not denying that, but she jerked her chin at the screen. If nothing else, the Straw Hat Luffy, he's certainly shown he's nothing like Kid or Shiki, hasn't he? A tense silence fell. Then her superior let out a lengthy sigh before inclining his head the slightest amount. Just as slightly, the corners of Ain's mouth turned upward. You, woo. Apparently, however, not everyone was of the same opinion. Oh, you, little brat. Shiki all but literally erupted, raw fury blazing from his person, glaring at the rookie with unbridled hate. You're as delusional as Roger was. But you know what? That's perfectly alright. This is my world. A world where might makes right. Where strength means everything. You want to prove me wrong. Shiki put his arms out to his sides, a grimace of pain coming over his face. The reason why became clear a moment later as blood erupted from his lower half where his knees once were. The stumps no longer stopped. Then, just as suddenly, the blood flew back where it came from. Shiki hardly heeded this, more focused on the trade-off of leaving him legless once more, without a flinch. His hands reached out and closed around the newly freed hilts of Odo and Kagurashi for the first time in 20 years. Then let our cause's face one another head-on. He roared. My freedom, Luffy snarled, pumping his legs and causing steam to course over his body as he swung his pipe out viciously. My strength, Shiki growled, effortlessly taking on one of his old fighting stances. I'll prove it's right. And with that, the two shot at each other, each swinging their weapons. Right from start, Luffy was driven back. Shiki hooking the pipe out of the way with one of the swords and nearly taking Luffy's head off with the other. Only a frantic duck prevented the latter. And only an ironclad grip prevented Shiki from twisting the pipe out of his opponent's fingers barely a second later. Out of position, Luffy had to have Billy outright fly off to avoid the follow-up flurry of stabs. Heel had to add a few thin cuts to the balance sheet. Circling around, this time Luffy went on the offensive, swinging his pipe in a wide arc at Shiki's head. Shiki's swords flashed up, one he was pushing the pipe out of the way and the other stabbing at Luffy's throat. Another frantic dodge saved his life, though the cut on his neck was still dangerously close to the all-important blood vessels. Yeah, ha, too bad. Shiki cackled. A sheet of paper more and you'd have been dead. Yeah, well, and still here. Luffy roared. But he didn't order Billy in again. Instead, he pulled back to where Bardo had unsuccessfully been circling for an opening. Shiki, for his part, let him either confident in his chances or unwilling to risk hopping on the close combat pain train again. Or a bit of both. This isn't working, Luffy grumbled. Well, I've got a new move to try out, Bardo replied. Should be able to brute force through his guard. If you can get him to loosen his grip on his swords. Both pirates grimaced in thought. Then Luffy blinked as something occurred to him. Hey, he's probably using his power on those swords in case he drops them or something, right? Bardo frowned, turning that over. Yeah, probably. Why? For the first time since the fight had started, Straw Hat Luffy smiled. It was not a nice smile. One loosened grip coming right up. Luffy declared, tapping Billy and charging forward again, pipe raised high. The same thing again. How primitive. Shiki scoffed, bringing up his swords in preparation for the attack. Once again, Luffy's straightforward haymaker was brushed aside by Shiki, just on a different spot on the pipe. But this time, Luffy adeptly spun the pipe so that the other end tapped Shiki's other sword. And suddenly, Shiki flinched and nearly fumbled the hilts out of his hands. Oh. Back on the Sunny, the rest of the crew, who had by now finished their work and reconvened on the ship to watch the fight, had mixed feelings about the maneuver. Luffy did what? He does realize that one brush with Shiki and we have faceplitted on the ocean, right? But with every iota of their attention trained on the brawl, and with the noise of the storm around them, none of the Straw Hats noticed that for a good while now, Soundbite's eyes had been blanked out and Static sang in the air. Oh. Shiki stared at his swords. They'd gotten heavy. Heavier than they'd been since Impel Du. Sea Prism Stone. How had he forgotten that the brat's pipe was reinforced with Sea Prism Stone? Yo, Shiki! Glancing up, Shiki beheld a gleaming barrier made sword the size of a galleon's mainmast and 3 times as wide. And it didn't hide the shit-eating grin on Bardo's face. Take this. Barrier buster. With a heave of his arm, Bardo sent the barrier sword hurtling down. Shiki crossed his swords and caught the blade on them, intending to deflect it out of the way. But they were heavier than they'd been in 20 years. The weight distribution was entirely off. Gah. The result was that the massive cleaver knocked the swords clean out of Shiki's hands, also opening up a nasty gash in his left shoulder. As he watched his beloved companions plummet down through the clouds to the sea below, Golden Lion Shiki felt numb. For a little while at least. Pretty soon it was overtaken by blinding rage. And then it passed from blinding back into numb. All the anger was still there, but it was ice in his veins instead of magma. So it was with calm and forethought that he executed his next move. He stretched his power further than he had since lifting Merveille into the sky, pulling 4 specific islands closer to him. From the Winter Island, he drew the snow that fell and compacted there. From the Summer Island, he drew sand hot enough to burn and rock the color of a setting sun. From the Fall Island, he drew scraps of leaves and wood, ignited by the lightning that Witch had summoned. And finally, from the Spring Island, he drew air and the cherry blossoms that wafted within. And these elements, drawn from the 4 seasons, shaped themselves before the East Rookie's eyes into lions of snow and sand and fire and air. Nothing at all like the beast Shiki had summoned earlier to squash the Witch. Celestial Emperors, Elemental Lions, he intoned before jabbing his finger at Straw Hat and Black Bart. Kill. Luffy and Bardo and their mounts all tensed up as the lions charged at them. The Wind Lion arrived first, splashing against, and then around Bardo's barrier. As Luffy prodded Billy to take the rear position, Bardo shifted his barrier against the sand and ice lions, wincing as they butted heads with his barrier. The Fire Lion followed that by breathing a gout of flame that also harmlessly splashed against his barrier, allowing the other 2 lions to flow around his barrier. Luffy, you've got him coming. Bardo barked. I know, but the Wind Lions run offhand. Both rookies froze as a terrible thought came to them. Taking a few moments to think about it, I realized that I've been doing this all wrong, Shiki said with an icy smirk. If I'm going to crush you brats, I need to crush your spirits first. The Sunny. Luffy cried out in horror, spurring Billy on. Bardo would have followed had the Fire Lion not again thrown a fireball at him, and it didn't matter. Luffy's attempt to disengage was met by a rain of projectiles that forced Billy to hurriedly change course. Go ahead and see if you can stop them. But as soon as you turn your backs, I'll shish kebab you, Shiki drawled, curled javelins of rain and earth floating around him. Hey, dumbass. You're supposed to learn from your enemy's mistakes. The grin fell off of Shiki's face as Boss Dugong's voice reached him. Forewarned is forearmed, and in case you forgot, the rest of us are still in fighting shape. 3-sword style, 108 caliber Phoenix. Coup de vent. Aperitif. Typhoon Lash. Sekhmet's Might. 2 wind cannons erupted from 1,000 Sunny, tearing through the form of the Wind Lion and leaving it to disperse. 2 smaller ones followed. The remaining lions having enough forewarning to dodge right into a bracket pattern of explosives that tore the Sand Lion to shreds and batted the Ice Lion around like a rock in a tumble dryer. Assured that his crew could take care of themselves, the panic melted from Luffy's face, leaving behind only the icy rage that had held him the entire fight. I'm not going to let you threaten my crew again, he said evenly. Shiki's only response was to hurl the projectiles of earth and rain that he'd collected. But instead of hitting, or harmlessly flying by, they instead hit Bardo's barrier and the Fire Lion still plastered to the front of it. The earth, of course, was no harm to it, but that much water put out its flame with a hiss of steam. Youps, Bardo drawled, shoving a finger up his nose. Roaring in frustration, Shiki pulled more ammunition from the islands and from the sky, throwing it indiscriminately at the 2 rookies so determined to vex him. And to Shiki's delight, some of them actually hit, drawing blood as they stabbed in. How? Their mounts were flying slower, and the fighters were less nimble in dodging and deflecting. Bardo often moved his barrier off himself and in front of Luffy to his own detriment. Grinning, Shiki upped the tempo, only to have his opponents duck behind an extra-large barrier and charge straight at him. Rolling his eyes, he merely floated out of the way, only for the barrier to vanish and then appear right in front of him, too close to dodge. The collision was painful and disorienting, and the kick that thundered into his kidneys even more so. Whirling around, Shiki did one thing he almost never did. He grabbed Luffy by the leg, yanked him in, and punched him in the face. It didn't cause much injury, but it allowed Shiki to claw for distance. We're wearing him down, Bardo declared as Lindy flew up next to Billy and Luffy. Heh. Good thing he didn't think to just, wrap up the Sunny rock or tilt it into the ocean or something. Or heck, he's touched it before he could. Suddenly, a low grinding rumble caught their attention, and the 2 pirates looked around for the source. What the heck? Luffy wondered. It's like cross stomach after he's eaten a biscuit. Luffy? Drawn by the uncharacteristic tone of fear in his usually cocky voice, Luffy looked where Bardo was looking. His immediate conclusion. Yeah, fear was the appropriate response as someone almost certainly Shiki ripping an entire mountain out of a nearby island. Jahahaha. Shiki laughed, obviously at the very dregs of his sanity, drawing the pirates' attention back to him. Let's see you try blocking this. Luffy grimly eyed the massive mound of stone now flying towards them with deceptive speed. Can you block this? He asked Bardo. Bardo also eyed the stone, trying to ignore the headache driving railroad spikes into his skull. Yeah, I can, he reluctantly groaned. But I'm probably going to be useless after. 30 seconds. Once again, Luffy bit his thumb. Gear 3rd. Gritting his teeth, Bardo threw up the widest, thickest barrier he could. The sheet of light then folded in on itself and doubled the thickness of the barrier, heedless of the railroad spikes in the caster's brain upgrading to steam-driven piles. Then the barrier folded in on itself again, making it 4 times as thick. And once more, for a barrier 8-fold stronger than any Bartolomeo had ever produced. Barrier, Bardo groaned in agony before roaring and throwing his arms wide, which expanded the blockade to the size of a small fortress. Bastian. The agony was all but literally blinding, and that was before the rock actually hit. Beyond the headache, Bartolomeo's arms were what supported his barriers, with a physical connection, and under such a strain, they snapped in multiple spots. Combined with the headache, it was a wonder Bardo didn't pass out on the spot. Instead, his arms and the barrier fell, the mountain falling to the ocean in shattered pieces. Finish him, he roared. Luffy's arm inflated, the air this time traveling down his body into his foot. This required him to hop onto one foot, and use his hands to direct Billy to soar at Shiki, and also do something the duck hadn't done in the fight yet. Goo, you I refuse. Shiki howled as Billy weaved between the projectiles he haphazardly flung at the rookie. I refuse. You can't win. Grog. The Golden Lion clawed his hand forwards, throwing a chunk of rock in all but effigy. You are all nothing. You. Your dreams. Your ocean. All of it worthless. Destiny, fate, dreams. Ha. All dirt. The only thing that matters in this world. Renag. An entire cliff tore itself from the coast of Merve and started splintering as it shot itself skyward. All worthless in the face of power. For all that there was a variety of projectiles, however, they meant naught when they couldn't hit their mark. The majority were inaccurate enough as it was, but the few accurate projectiles were easy for Billy to dodge. Meanwhile, Luffy, grunting with exertion, sent his foot into the sky, piercing through the clouds. And given how the battle was taking place in the middle of the cyclone, there was only one logical outcome. Holy! Bartolomeo flinched away as a full-blown lightning bolt struck Luffy's foot, the astral light dancing over his idol and illuminating him in the darkened sky. But where Bardo was shocked into silence by the display, Shiki only got louder. Ja! Shiki roared in hysterical joy, his face the picture of madness at the spectacle before him. Do you see, Straw Hat? Even the gods reject you, they smite you down. This is my victory. My strong world. All mine to rule. Me and me alone. No. Not you. Never you. Shiki twitched as his voice whispered harshly in his ear, but before he could respond, don't you remember, Golden Lion Shiki? Remember the last time Luffy fought God? The synapses fired in Shiki's brain and horror set in. Piunt. Luffy's voice echoed throughout the heavens. No. Yes. Thor. No. Yes, and forever yes. The gods haven't rejected Luffy, you braggart. They reject you. This is the end. Nuo. Shiki wailed, desperation, terror, and denial mixing in equal parts in his voice as he threw as much stone, as much power, as much of his strong world as he could manage at Luffy. He dug deep, he threw it all. X. And it was all for nothing as the judgment came down. Shiki stared in horror as the titanic wind descended on him, wreathed in light and energy. The attack couldn't have lasted more than 5 seconds, but to the Golden Lion it was an eternity of hell. For in that eternity, he could not stop hearing, and he could not stop seeing. Shiki. Straw Hat Luffy's voice roared out, divine fury lacing his every word. Shiki's eyes widened as the axe fell, but not because of the actual attack. Stay away from my crew! No, you can't. You can't do this to me. Shiki howled, screaming at the heavens in desperation. You can't do this to me. And stay away. Not again, Din. The Golden Lion wailed, shoving as much earth forwards as he could, trying to block what was coming, what he knew was there, to shield himself from the reality. I can't lose to you again. Not to you. You can't do this to me. You can't. But no matter how he tried to block it, how he tried to deny it, his desperation just wasn't enough. From the East Blue. Stone shattered, his will shattered, he shattered. And so did Shiki the Golden Lion lose, once more, to a man from the East Blue. And as he lost, as the light of the divine judgment burst through his defenses and laid him low, the entire world bore witness as the Golden Lion's wrath, his despair, his misery, the totality of his being manifested itself in one final scream, cursing the name of the one who had somehow, against all odds, bested him all those years ago, the name that had started everything. Ruu Jair. And then, with his pride conquered, everything fell. Oh, it would be a surprise to nobody that the Straw Hat Pirates had set up a plan in the eventuality inevitability, in all honesty, that Merve would fall toward the sea. The moment that the palace was emptied of valuables and enemies and set to explode, they had returned to their beloved ship, strung the biggest piece of cloth in the palace that they could find to it, and braced themselves. To be blunt, having the ground pulled out from under you was an idiom for a very good reason. That parachute had better work. Sanji yelled out in more than a little panic as gravity reclaimed its hold on the land, dragging it and everything upon it back toward the sea below. What, you don't have confidence in my ability to sail us through hell and high water? Mary sardonically called out from the helm. My lack of confidence is in the only thing keeping us from dropping like a stone, Sanji clarified, shooting a nasty look at their makeshift parachute. Ah, come on. Cross cackled with a careless wave of his hand as he yanked hard on a line that kept Shiki's flag secure. If there's one thing we can take confidence in, it's how much effort Shiki would have put into reinforcing his own ugly-ass symbol. Personally, Mary added, I'm not exactly enthused about Big Bro going through that scare that Cross put me through after Skypia. I said I was sorry. Cross spread his arms in a show of innocence, though his shit-eating grin said otherwise. And The tactician flinched as the ship growled. Okay, fine, you called my bluff, but in my defense. He's not talking about you. Mary cut him off with a shocked look. Sunny just said that Perona isn't on board. What? Nami yelled, shooting a look back at the land that they were slowly sliding off of before running to the side. We have to. It's too late, Nami. Usopp interrupted, both verbally and physically as he shaved behind her and grabbed her forearm. We're already falling, there's no time left to go back. Nami made no attempt to struggle, the cold truth of Usopp's words persuading her against her will. A moment later, a firm hand grabbed Nami's shoulder, and she looked at Zoro's unflinching expression. She can take care of herself, he said. Nami cast a tortured look for the shore, and for an agonizing minute it seemed like she'd actually fight to disembark the ship. And then she snapped her head away, and marched back to the center of the Sunny, eyes screwed shut. Brace 4. Hold it. Cross cut in. He then read up to his shit-eating grin as he brought his mic up to his mouth. Well, loyal viewers, there you have it. 1 week ago, Shiki the Golden Lion, former rival of the Pirate King himself, attacked our crew, stole one of our crewmates, and threatened our home sea, the East Blue. And not even he managed to get away with it, by the efforts of my captain, Straw Hat Luffy, and another rookie from the East Blue, Black Bart Bartolomeo. Shiki and his 20-year plan are going down in flames. With the East Blue and our crew safe and sound, it's time to head back to the Sea of Adventure. And you can also look forward to the SBS resuming its regular broadcasting once we've managed to get some well-needed R&R. But for now, this is Jeremiah Cross, and Soundbite, signing off. Cross and his snail crowed in concert as he slammed the connection shut, jabbing his finger at Mary. All right, Hidate. You heard him. Jin roared from the deck of the galleon parked next to the Sunny. We came, we saw, we kicked their asses. Now let's get the hell out of here. Crew, everyone. Nami concurred in the same breath. Set sail. With that, the sails of the Thousand Sunny and the Cannibal unfurled, and a rushing wind of their descent seized on them immediately. In short order, the ships tipped over the edge of the island, and for the next several seconds they were free falling. Ahira F. Wump! And then, as a final insult to the Golden Lion, the fall of the two crews that ended him and his ambitions was arrested thanks to the flags that they had stolen from Shiki's flagship. And as the aftershock of the snap wore off, both crews got to their feet and turned their attention back toward the falling islands. Where are they? Usopp muttered. Come on, Luffy, come on. Bardo, I swear to hell if you actually died to that bastard. Jin snarled around the thumb he was chewing on. Despite themselves, most of the Straw Hats and Bardo Club were holding their breath. There! Here they come! Then, barely visible in the distance, a speck of yellow appeared, which slowly grew into the familiar forms of Billy and Lindy. And on their backs, exhausted from their ordeal but still very much alive, was the slumped and groaning Bartolomeo and the panting and shrunken but grinning Monkey D. Luffy. Hey guys. I'm alive. The miniaturized rubber man greeted as exuberantly as his shrunken vocal cords would allow. Why do you say that like it's a good thing? Dumbass Bardo groaned, his limbs swinging lifelessly at his side. I swear to heck my arms feel like they're gonna fall off, so if you guys could be real gentle about getting me W.A.N. Og. Bardo cut himself off in a pain and panic yelp as Lindy bodily bucked his captain from his back. The barrier men spent a second writhing in utter agony from the impact before shooting a scathing glare at the dragon. Fucking fuck, stupid fucking fuck, why the fuck would you fucking fuck that? He hissed viciously. Well, that demonstrates the flexibility of that word, Robin muttered. Lindy's response was to flash a cocky smirk. Cause I felt like it, he rumbled without a hint of remorse. Bardo's responding slew of profanity was without a hint of censor. A round of laughter echoed across the two ships, relief and good humor lightening everyone's spirits. Wait, what about the villagers? Until Vivi's exclamation killed the mood hard and prompted them all to turn back toward the fallen island. Thankfully, it wasn't long before more silhouettes came into view, not unlike a flock of birds in appearance. Amazingly, it was by all appearances the villagers, gliding on the air with the feathers on their arms. How? Karoo asked through a drop beat, his tone weak. I should be surprised by this. I really should. But after a few weeks with you guys, I'm not, Perona shrugged her shoulders with a defeated sigh. Agreed, Robin nodded in, well, agreement. I wonder if I'll be able to do that with my new YERK. Kana started to muse as she fluttered her wings before yelping as a large, gorilla-esque hand grabbed the once vestigial limb. Not until we've recovered from this mess, Chopper firmly stated. Why yes, doctor. He does raise a good point, Sue said, flopping onto the deck as she kneaded her paws into her temples. Now that the fight's over, I just want to sleep. She cracked an eye and glared at their current interloper. But first, care to explain what you think you're doing, Ghost Princess? Those who hadn't already realized who the second speaker was turned towards the floating form of the Lolita. Perona. Nami gasped in relief, running up to the ghost with tears in her eyes. Oh, thank God, you're still alright. Look, just tell us where you are, and Billy. The navigator waved at the Electroduck. Billy, get ready to fly, we're going back for... actually. Nami was interrupted by Perona, who floated before Nami and was wearing a naturally contented smile. I'd really prefer if you didn't do that. Please. The ghost princess asked politely. Nami blinked, utterly dumbfounded. WH what? Perona. Why on earth? And I'd prefer you not do that because, well, as fun as our time together has been, Perona's smile became slightly sheepish as she floated back, off the edge of the ship and in the direction of the falling Merveille. I'd really rather not leave. The navigator's mind flat out stalled as she tried to process just what on earth she was hearing. Perona. She breathed. Horo, what did you already forget? Perona tucked a lock of hair behind her ear in an almost shy manner. I never planned on joining your crew to begin with, remember. And don't get me wrong, after the past few weeks, I can definitely understand how it could have happened, how in another life. Maybe, and even now I probably wouldn't mind. The spirit trailed off for a moment before shaking her head with a wry chuckle. But no, I have other plans in mind now. So sorry, but I won't be coming back. Perona then turned towards Luffy and curtsied, tugging her skirt out in an overly cutesy display of deference. And as such, thank you, Straw Hat Luffy. You had no reason to trust me, no reason to let me stay on your ship, but you did anyway. You showed me unconditional kindness where every time before someone wanted something from me, and I honestly can't thank you enough for that. And when the day comes that you're crowned as king, I'd very much like to be there to see it. Shishishi. The newly restored rubber man chuckled. Ma, no problem. Perona nodded gratefully. She then turned towards Nami with a tearful smile. And Nami, she shook her head with a hiccup. God, where do I even start? Thank you for being my friend, Nami. You aren't just the first friend I've ever had, you're the best I could have asked for. And I am going to miss you so much. Nami rubbed the tears from her eyes with a heavy sniff. Why, you're sure you don't want to come with us? We could let you keep the crow's nest if you want. Veto. Zoro and Cross interjected. Horo. Perona chuckled. I'm sure, Nami. But as it is, I have different arrangements in mind. A palace perfectly empty for me to move into, and a load of cute new pets just begging for my love. Nami blinked in confusion. And then Perona pointed skyward. Nami looked up and promptly paled as she caught sight of the trio of Giga birds circling on high. Parent, Nami breathed numbly. What exactly were you doing during the raid? Oh, this and that, Perona giggled with her more normal ambitiousness. Her expression then softened kindly. Goodbye, Perona jerked back in shock as Nami lunged forwards and threw her arms around the ghost in the closest approximation to a hug she could manage. Once she got her wits about her, however, the ghost princess returned the hug in the same capacity. We would have raised hell together, wouldn't we? Perona whispered through her tears. Nami hiccuped a laugh of her own, drawing it even closer to the ghost. We still could, she breathed in her ear. Perona blinked in surprised confusion, but before she could do or say anything, Nami hissed a string of numbers in her ear before drawing back, a smirk and a finger on her lips. The ghost princess blinked a bit more. She then red-upped at her smile and nodded. Goodbye, Straw Hats, Perona breathed in farewell. Till we meet again. And with that, the ghost princess dissolved, her astral form collapsing into motes of ectoplasm and wafting back to the plummeting island. Chopper let out a sigh as he kneaded his brow. I would have appreciated a chance to make sure my treatment was working. Well, alright, let's see what the damage is this time, Luffy, he said. Fond exasperation in his face as he retrieved Luffy and laid him down on the grassy deck. Nami, you're next. Right, the navigator nodded fearlessly, directing her attention to the rest of her crew, and then slumping down. It looks like we won't be navigating anywhere until we touch back down. I think I'm just going to take a little rest. Hey, trust me, I think we could all use some rest, came a new voice from beside the Sunny. A quick look revealed one of the last people either of the crews ever expected. Ever. Several voices inquired. Who? Was the question that several more asked. She was one of the slaves working at one of Shiki's bases, Robin explained with honest surprise. Yeah, one of the slaves who went free with all the rest. Valentine gaped in confusion. Ever, shouldn't you be back with your family? Oh, I went back to them all right. Ever nodded in confirmation, beaming with unbridled positivity. Found them after our village was wrecked, had the whole tearful reunion bit. Very dramatic, she smirked confidently as she cocked her head to the side. Ah, and then, I joined the bandwagon a lot of others were hopping on. And by bandwagon, you mean. Golden Week trailed off curiously. Well, the winged woman pointed up at the sky. You see everyone splitting off here and there. Pirates looked up and saw that indeed, while there were plenty of citizens of Merveille circling above the island, waiting for it to land in the ocean, clusters were splitting off and starting to flap away. See, we were all trapped on that island under Shiki's rule for 20 years, Ever explained, grimacing. Meaning that some people, like me, have never actually had the chance to live free. So now that Shiki's gone, a lot of people just want to leave, see the world, and never look back. People like me. And while most folks are winging it on their own, she smirked as she folded her arms behind her head. I thought that I'd save myself the effort and hitch a ride. Wait, you want to join us? Donnie sputtered in shock. Them specifically, Ever said, jerking her thumb at the cannibal with a flat look. No offense to you guys, but you all are a whole nother brand of crazy that I don't feel like dealing with. I'll settle for relatively deranged, thank you very much. Preach it, sister, Golden Week deadpan as she held out her knuckles to the feathered woman, who promptly bumped them with her own in a grin. You've got spirit, Ever, Bartolomeo rasped, pinning Ever with a serious look. But can you actually fight? I run this crew like I ran Logtown. I can't let you join if you're going to be dead weight when it comes to combat. Everyone on this crew needs to be able to hold their own against the other monsters of the Grand Line. Ever returned Bartolomeo's gaze evenly for a few moments. Then she flapped her arms, flipped herself in the air, and brought one leg down in an axe kick aimed straight at his skull. Scrang! She winced as it made contact with the barrier instead, and withdrew her leg with a pain flex. FFF, fucking hell, I think that broke my heel, you bastard, she grumbled with half-hearted acid. There's a reason I say that they're indestructible, seeing as it took Shiki using mountains to break them, and even then, my arms are what broke first, Bardo snorted with a snaggletooth scowl, which he shoved in Ever's face. And besides that, how the hell do you think that attacking me while I'm exhausted and nursing 2 broken arms would do anything to convince me that you were capable of lasting in a real fight on this ocean? The Mervillon shook out her foot a bit more before looking at Bartolomeo with a pleasant smile. Oh no, I attacked because I knew you'd be able to put it up, even while looking like some of the nastier beasties back home had chewed you up and spat you out. And if I couldn't, Ever rolled her eyes dismissively. Well then you'd hardly be worth following, wouldn't you? Bartolomeo processed that with a carefully blank face. Ha 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 ha. Then he started laughing. It only lasted a few seconds before a spasm of pain cut him off, but the message was clear even before he shot Ever a grin. That's good enough for me, he said. You'll have to carve your place out amongst our band of bozos by hook crook, and whatever other cheap shots you can throw. And if someone pisses you off or something, then don't bother coming crying to me, but other than that, he shrugged, wincing his way through the pain. Welcome aboard, Ever. Amongst the straw hats, Sanji chewed on his cigarette doubtfully as he leaned in close to Robin. And then, know what to tell somebody how to live their life. But she's a beautiful young girl with limited life experience signing on with one of the roughest and most certifiable crews alive. Shouldn't we, I don't know, say something? Robin made to answer, but was cut off by Ever leaping onto the Sunny's railing and shooting her fist in the air. Looks like you're stuck with me, bitches. She crowed, basking in the round of boisterous cheers that erupted from the cannibals. Robin let a playful smile play across her face. Counterpoint, she purred. She's a young girl whose entire life experience comes from serving as a waitress in a pirate bar. I think she'll be just fine. She patted Sanji on the cheek as she walked off. It's cute of you to act so concerned, though. Sanji's head hung with a groan. On the one hand, I love being touched by a beautiful woman. On the other, even I can't just brush off being stepped on that badly. If you've gotten over that by tomorrow, Sanji, I need to talk to you about something, Cross said, tilting his hat over his eyes as he reclined on the grassy lawn, armor shed beside him. You too, Donnie. Huh. Okay. The dugong in question agreed before returning to resting with his siblings. Hey look, it's the Marines. It is called. All eyes turned downward, where a fleet of battleships could be seen turned toward where the ruins of Merveille were settling. Oh, this should be good, Bardo leered viciously. What do you say to a little taunting about beating them to the... No. All eyes snapped toward the supine rubber man, who had a firm frown on his face. What do you mean, no? They came here to stop Shiki. They came here to fight for the East Blue. They came here to fight for the same reason that we were fighting. Luffy closed his eyes. We would have been on the same side. Why would we make fun of them for wanting to help save our home? There he goes making way too much sense again. Usopp heaved his shoulders in a sigh. But hey, if they leave us alone then. Boom. All attention snapped back down below, and Usopp brought down his goggles to see what happened. Kind of anticlimactic. Yes, they're firing at us, but we're still too high for their cannonballs to reach us, he said. Me, and we're not close enough for me to taunt anyone anyway, Soundbite crossed his eye stalks in consternation. Suo frustrating. Hey, I don't mind it, Marion, at least steering the Sunny with a few stray taps on the woodwork. We've kicked enough ass and torn apart enough psyche for tonight. Let's just enjoy the trip down. She hopped up onto the nearest railing and leaned back on her palms as she gazed out at the horizon. A lazy smile on her face. Man, never thought I'd ever be lucky enough to see this again. Everyone else stilled at the musing, and the crews all wandered over to gaze over the edge and off into the distance. This is impressive, mister. Five whistled, eyeing the ocean below. I guess you see this all the time, Miss Valentine. Valentine giggled, leaning on her umbrella. This is a whole different scale, mister. 5. With that, the two crews eased into relaxation, which for the Straw Hats soon turned into rest, which just as quickly turned into straight-out collapsing so that they could sleep off the fatigue of the last week and the final fight against Shiki. This, in turn, led to no small amount of panic from their erstwhile travel companions. As ever and always, not a quiet moment on the deck of the Thousand Sunny. Oh, a few hours later, on an uninhabited island not far from the ruins of Merveille, a bloodied, legless form cracked open a bloodshot eye.
He dreamed
Ragged
opening
gasps
some
tore out of
story
his
before
throat
the
as
false
consciousness rudely
decision that he
intruded.
sells out
Memories
feast.
of recent events coalesced in his mind, and as he felt the stumps where his legs once were, now bereft of his precious swords, hatred crystallized in his heart. Monkey D. Luffy, he snarled, forcing himself upright. I've lost everything to another rookie from the East Blue, no. A mirthless smile came over his face. No, I still have my powers. That's all I need. I'll take the time I need to clean my wounds. He turned his gaze upward. I'll fly to the White Sea, nobody will be able to find me there. I'll form a new plan, new weapons, a new army, and next time I'll break his spirit first. I'll find his home, and I'll slaughter those he cares about most. Jajahaha. Jahava. Shiki threw his head back and roared with laughter, heedless of the blood he was hurling with every guffaw. I haven't lost yet. I'll have my revenge. I'll be back. Do you hear me? I'll be. You shall not, Cretan. Crack. A Hackian force heel slammed into his skull, sending Shiki back into blissful unconsciousness. A red and white serpent bound him in its coils before moving back toward its master, who had a transponder snail out and in her palm. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, I have located the fallen form of Shiki the Golden Lion, Pirate Empress Boa Hancock announced with a prim sniff. And quite fortunately for your government's reputation, he is still alive. You may retrieve him and do with him whatever you will. The lion was silent for a few moments, the snail's expression slightly wide-eyed. Then, I am grateful for your assistance, Boa Hancock. But I thought you generally made it a rule to not care about anything outside the calm belt. Hancock tossed her hair dismissively. I decided to make an exception. That's the best I'm getting out of you, isn't it? Sengoku sighed, grimacing. He forged on before she could reply. And if I asked you to extend that exception to the Straw Hats? Ka-lick. Hancock smirked as she pressed her finger into the receiver's cradle. I suspect that will suffice as answer enough. Honestly, some men, they just can't be satisfied with what they get, can they? Marguerite sighed wistfully. Indeed, Marigold snickered before giving her sibling a contemplative look. Though, I am curious, sister. Why did you decide to intervene when we never have before? Did you not hear me, Mary? Hancock raised her chin as she strutted past her larger sibling, Salom, at her heels. I decided to make an exception. But quite unlike what Sengoku believes, I did not make this exception for the sake of this. She sneered as she snapped a kick across her captive's jaw. Pathetic wretch. Rather. Boa Hancock turned her gaze skyward, smiling fondly as she recalled the sight of a pair of ships gliding into the sunset as she had seen a time ago. I made an exception, she breathed warmly. For the sake of an exceptional man. Cross-Bringen. Our sincerest apologies, ladies and gentlemen, but we will be ending the chapter here. We intended to finish Strong World with this, but the aftermath is shaping up to be much longer than we expected. But you can't be too mad as us since we got all the action out of the way first, right? In any case, it shouldn't take too much longer for us to finish up part 4, which will be the final part before we move to the last pre-time skip saga. Also, here's a tidbit. Hidden in this chapter are expies to the original work that we, the Cross-Brain, will be working on during our hiatus. Locate them if you can and look forward to our work. Patient N, and if you were wondering about Hornets and from part 1, we were referring to Perona joining the crew. Don't get us wrong, Ego and I both wanted her to join, but at this point we need to be very selective about whom we add to the crew. And Perona just doesn't add enough. We do have other plans for her though, and you've probably already guessed what they are. Yes. And one more important matter. Credit for the analyzation of Indigo's chemical juggling and the mechanics of the subsequent fight scene belongs to the love of my life. The amazing Vikinger. Up arrow top. Left arrow previous chapter. Next chapter right arrow. Edit bookmark. Comments 33. Viokia, Tired Jellyfish 3065, Dank Thomas 1, Will Saints, Fanquin Off North, Genleo, Wonders Corner, We. This bites. Zamiak. Chapter 66. Chapter 58, Strong World Aftermath. Just rewards received. The face of the seas are shifting. Cross-Bringen, we were going for a double, but with the unexpected and very well done make posted by Storysmith 112,358 on space battles, let's call it a second triple tap. Though unfortunately, we already have plans made for Sabaody and the events leading up to it, such that we're not able to change things and make it fit into the story. Patient N, on another note, remember when we said you probably already know what we have planned for Perona? Well, we thought of something else while writing this chapter. Let's see if any of you guessed it. If Shiki had any brain power to spare for the Straw Hats the day after his defeat, he would have been livid to see that. Quite unlike Alabasta or Nai's lobby. The full force of his assembled armies hadn't managed to inflict enough damage and fatigue to keep the Straw Hats down past a good night's rest. With 2 exceptions, Bartolomeo was still recovering and would be without use of his arms for the foreseeable future. And Luffy was under doctor's orders to take it easy, but that was it. That meant that when the sun rose the next morning, there were now 2 infamous ships with 2 infamous crews sailing alongside each other toward the end of paradise, with 2 individuals from Hervé sticking around. Heaven help whoever got in their way, because no earthly power was going to. On the Cannibal, Ever was having trouble establishing her place in the Bardo Club for lack of specialty. It wasn't a huge deal, of course, her crewmates were perfectly welcoming, but, well, it was a rare individual who was happy to live the pirate life as a grunt. Meanwhile, on 1000 Sunny, the situation was being handled a bit more smoothly. No, you are not going back, do you hear me? Nami ground out, her foot tapping impatiently on the lawn. You were parking your feathery ass right here and staying with us, got it. Relatively more smoothly. BB but. The Electro duck blubbered, flapping his wings uselessly. I am a coward, I'm ham-beaked, I've never left Merveille, I don't know most of you. I had just weigh you down, get you in trouble and... Clonk. Billy ducked his head with a pained whimper, wings nursing the fresh lump growing on his skull. Oh whoa, Billy, Nami stated, leaning in close to the fowl's head. You might have run it first, but that doesn't matter because then you came back. You came back, you helped us when we really needed it, and you even helped Luffy beat Shiki. Heck, I'd go as far as to say you're one of the biggest reasons we won. Also, having more emergency food supplies won't hurt, Sandy added as he strolled by, a fresh bag of food on his shoulders. Zizi. And then down he went, smoking for more than just his mouth with a bag of deep-fried supplies on his shoulder. Ignore that idiot, Nami sighed, not missing a beat. The point is, you came back to help, so all of those things you listed, they're irrelevant as far as I care. So you're going nowhere, got it? While Billy squirmed uncertainly. And if I actually wanted to go, Nami donned a catty grin. Then I'd Shanghai you regardless of whether you wanted to stay or not. After all, we are still pirates. Billy stewed that over for a second before giving her a shaky grin. Then in that case, I suppose I might as well go along with you, ha. Got it in one. Nami chuckled in agreement, reaching out to ruffle his comb. Now, if I let you go, are you going to go flapping for the horizon? No, I won't. Good. The navigator nodded, removing the cloud she'd been using to pin Billy's tail and waving for him to follow her. Now come on, let's see about getting you a cool saddle like Karu, alright. I've even got an idea or 2 for it. Okay. The duck perked up eagerly, waddling after his new best friend. Nami, however, was obviously in no hurry to go, and took a second to glance around the deck before reluctantly heading out into plain view. While most of her crewmates were out and about and treating her like normal, having apparently had the patience to hear her message through to the end, Nami had yet to locate the 3 dunderheads who, as far as she could tell, had, but as reluctant as she was to face the particular firing squad, she couldn't very well leave her newest friend her own animal companion. It was taking all she had to keep from bursting out into ecstatic squeeze. Foreseeing the wind either. As such, she set out across the deck and strode with confidence to the Sunny's pavilion, already a center of activity. Once they'd all rested up, Mary had unloaded the prodigious amount of loot that she filched from Shiki's palace. While the vast majority was mundane odds and ends of varying usefulness that Mary had stolen in the throes of a thieving spree that Nami recognized from her own youth, there was a sizable pile of gold, another 100 million at face value, probably more ones of praise, and a massive cache of weapons at Usopp Lassu. Mikey, Frankie, and Mary were excitedly pouring over. Connus was standing off to the side, mostly succeeding in concealing her own excitement. Enjoying yourselves, I take it? Nami chuckled. Sue attempted to dry hump. Lasso panted eagerly as he nuzzled up against a particularly large bore rifle. Do it and I'll neuter you. Usopp snapped, jabbing a wrench at the hound. Down, boys, don't make me separate you, Connus chided, her hands continuing to polish her recently modified bazooka. Take it as a yes, Frankie chuckled, nodding at Nami. So anything we can help you with, big sis? Him. Nami humped, jabbing her thumb at Billy. Seeing as I've gotten myself a mount to match Kuru, I'm going to need a saddle too. Insulated against electricity and heat, of course. And while I'm talking mounts, she grimaced uncomfortably. My waiver. How likely? Well, I could rebuild it, but it'd take a lot of time and effort. We'd have to start from scratch. A better option would be another idea of mine. Putting the two projects together, Usopp suggested, looking at Nami with a glint and a grin. I've been working on the plans for Kuru anyway, and I think that you'll really like them. That work for you? Nami glanced back at Billy and nodded when he nodded. That's fine, do it after I examine every last page of the blueprints. Usopp ground his palm into his forehead. Why can you not let that go? Usopp groused. And by the way, this time, make sure you actually pay me up front before I get more than halfway through this thing. I'll take it into consideration, Nami muttered, before casting her eyes over the rest of the assembled arsenal. So, any standout pieces in all this hardware? Besides the obvious, I mean, she added, raising an eyebrow at the sight of Mary cuddling the rotary gun she'd yet to let go of. Actually, she had yet to change out of the outfit she donned as they charged the palace too, from the way she'd tossed it right back on after it was washed, where everyone else stored theirs away. Chances were it would be replacing her raincoat and leggings as her normal attire. The obvious is all we need. Mary squeaked, hefting the massive hunk of metal above her head. Do you know what this is? This is the M66 Dingo rotary cannon. It is one of the top firearms in all the 6 Seas, and it's going to be my new main weapon, You seriously? Nami questioned incredulously. I mean, the thing's twice your size, isn't it? Mary's expression flattened. You do see me holding it above my head like it was made of cardboard, right? Hey, alright. It is actually the perfect weapon for her, sis, Frankie interjected with a big grin. She can handle the firepower without flinching, and with a few mods from yours truly, it'll be a hell of a blunt instrument for cracking skulls too. Cool, huh? Well, wait, Nami cut herself off mid-sentence, narrowing her eyes accusingly at the rotary gun's ammo drum, the very large ammo drum. I might not know a lot about guns, but what I do know is that guns only take ammunition that works for them. And I'm guessing that a gun like that does not pack normal ammunition. How many barris does a cannon like that suck down? Cold sweat suddenly glistened on Mary's forehead, complete with an inability to meet Nami's gaze. Ooh, I don't. Let's see, Connus tapped her chin thoughtfully, completely missing the panic look Mary snapped at her. From what I remember, the M66 Dingo weighs 150 kilograms and fires 20,000 Duri. Custom tool cartridges at 10,000 rounds per minute. So by my calculations, the angel counted down on her fingers before nodding. It cost 40 million barris to fire this weapon for 12 seconds. One silent second later, Connus blanched as she realized what she'd just said. Oh dear. Rat egg. Nami loosed a possessed howl, grabbing the gun from Mary's hands with her eyes in tempo and hauling back to throw it as far as she could manage. Die, evil thing. Mine, baby. Mary declared, grabbing back the cannon from the cloud's clutches and shoving it inside her coat the moment that she had it in her grip again. She then began running around the deck. A prudent move considering that Nami was after her, iron hands outstretched and grasping furiously. Give me that metal monster so that I can drown you right the hell now. Nami screeched. Not on your life, bitch. The ship girl shot back. You're not taking my ticket to Batitude. And you're not going to use something that'll eat through our coffers faster than Luffy at an all-you-can-eat buffet. The navigator come treasurer spat. We only missed the poorhouse on water 7 thanks to Cross's knowledge. I'm not letting you land us in there with that thing. Okay, first of all, that simile is complete nonsense, and you know it. Our captain is instantaneous while my gun would take minutes. And second, you touch me, I'll scream bad touch. You can dent metal with your fists, people will believe that when pigs fly. Grah, hang on, damn it. Planting her feet, Mary spun around and raised her hands, both women skidding to a halt. Listen, the gun's expensive, yes. Nami rumbled, madness gleaming in her eyes. But, the ship girl continued in a panic. It won't actually affect us for ages. None of them will. I filled Shiki's entire magazine. He had a dozen drums of rounds for this beast. The navigator paused in her fury, frowning questioningly. And how long do you expect that to last? So long as I'm measured and cautious in my use. Give. Hey. Mary bristled indignantly before hanging her head with a defeated groan. All right, so I might see where you're coming from. She then snapped her head up with big watery. Clonk. Oh. Mary yelped. Cradling her new goose egg, she nodded frantically. All right. I legitimately promise that I will ration the ammo I have and keep my eyes and ears peeled for any opportunity to steal more. And if we do need to buy more, it comes out of my share. But if we run into another bastard like Shiki, all bets are off. Deal. Nami turned that over in her mind. Fine, she sighed, her gaze sharpening intently. But we are hammering things out right here, right now. Mary readied a sarcastic retort, only to transition into a shit-eating grin. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be happening anytime soon. Should've watched your volume, girly. It took Nami 5 seconds to process that statement, 2 to pale, and 1 to slap a hand to her face. They're right behind me, aren't they? Face the music, it'll just be easier on everyone. Me included, Tilda Mary sang as she rocked back and forth on her heels, a slightly crooked halo above her head. Sighing, Nami turned to face the expected sight, her captain, flanked by the first mate on one side and the third plus soundbite on the other. All standing behind her, arms crossed and expressions livid. But rather than cower, she simply matched them expression for expression. Before you take a strip out of my hide out of some misguided sense of injured pride, let me ask the 4 of you one question. She said before any of them could open their mouths. Did you listen to the entire message I left on the tone dial? Including the part that only someone who was with us on Thriller Bark would understand. The quartet paused, glancing uncomfortably between themselves. Not even the so-called god, huh? Nami sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Didn't think so. If you had bothered to listen to the whole thing, you would know that the last thing I said was, that's why I'm begging you to forgive me for doing something stupid and reckless again and expecting it to turn out like last time. She pulled back, observing the dumbfounded looks on her fellow mates' faces. You, complete, and utter, idiots. Luffy's reaction is no big surprise, I half expected it from him. But I expected more sense from you 3. There's just one problem with that, Nami. The 5 of them turned back toward Mary, who was looking at them with a fond smirk. Would you have spared enough time for sense, if you were in their shoes and Nijiko was in yours? Or hell, she asked innocently. Did you think for even a second when you hauled off and pinched me, Nami raised her finger and opened her mouth, and held that pose for a second before snapping her mouth shut. You make a very annoyingly accurate point. I learned from the B-tilde-ASD tilde. Mary sang as she walked off, probably tugging on the lapels of her greatcoat as she went. The three mates and Captain turned back to each other, no one speaking for a few moments. Call it even and never let it happen again, Cross suggested, tilting the brim of his hat down to cover his eyes. Fine by me, Nami said, smiling pleasantly. Agreed, Zoro nodded, his brow twitching furiously. Sorry, Luffy said, and then moving right along, Soundbite chirped. An inadvertent aid of that, interjected Donnie, sliding up beside Cross. 2 questions for you two. First off, just for the record, what's Billy's voice? Cross rolled his eyes, but didn't seem too exasperated this time. I'd complain, but it actually fits him. Karu got his voice from Donald Duck, Billy got his from Donald's nephews, Huey's, Dewey's, and Louis. Even I don't know which one his is. Soundbite snickered. Triplet nephews if you didn't catch it, Cross clarified. Donnie nodded in understanding. Makes sense. Other question. What was that about needing to talk to Sanji and me? Cross snapped his fingers and headed for the kitchen, gesturing for Donnie to follow. Right, thanks for reminding me. Do you still have the outfit from that psycho you fought on Thriller Bark? Donnie twitched viciously. Only because I can't burn the damn thing and our penny-pinching witch. Bite me. Nami threw over her shoulder. Won't let me toss it in the ocean like I wanted to, he finished. Perfect and convenient for you, seeing as we'll be getting rid of it as soon as Sanji gets something for me. With much more enthusiasm, Donnie followed Cross into the kitchen. Oh. Not far away, Robin knelt beside her flower garden with a warm smile, tending to a week's worth of neglect. Her fellow academic knelt beside her, who was sifting through the soil of a long and vacant pot, packing in the IQ plants he had retrieved from Indigo's laboratory. So, what did you get? The reindeer asked curiously, jotting down a few notes on the miraculous plant in his notebook. Nothing truly earth-shattering, sadly, Robin sighed, shaking her head. Some evidence on corrupt bases, names of moles, leaks, and even some particularly virtuous marines. Quite useful for Cross. But the most I could find otherwise was some history of the island and of Shiki himself. She scratched at a bandage on her cheek, drawing a pained grimace. The payoff was only barely worth the pain. She leaned down to take a closer look at the flower. I take it that your endeavor was far more successful. Chopper grinned sunnily as he nodded. Way more. Indigo's notes along with what I put together from what I saw on Merveille has given me so many ideas that I don't know where to start. The obvious first step would be actually using these plants, manufacturing serums of my own, not without the horrendous side effects, of course. Of course, Robin chuckled. Beyond that, the doctor tapped his hoof to his chin, humming in thought. Painful as it was, the fight did give me 1 or 2 ideas on my own brand of chemical warfare. With the right combinations, Chopper trailed off into a wide grin. But honestly, what I'm looking forward to the most is the sheer insight that this experience has given me on biological manipulation. Both in concrete and analyzed evidence, and my own, the reindeer cut off into a frown. I'm going to define it as a revelation, but I want to clarify that I mean that in a strictly philosophical manner, not a spiritual one. I wouldn't assume anything else from you, good doctor, the archaeologist replied, giving him a contemplative look. Though tell me, what does this new experience add up to? Chopper snapped his eyes up, a glimmer shining in his eyes. Not the familiar glimmer of madness, mind, the glimmer of academic ambition. A dissertation, he whispered reverently. A paper on zoomorph, morphology specifically, and biological auto-manipulation through biofeedback in general. The first of its kind. It's going to be revolutionary. I'm not going to rewrite biology textbooks. I'll be inspiring entirely new ones. He tilde. Descending into giggles, the Zoan started eagerly wiggling in place. Robin smiled as well at his enthusiasm, not having the heart to bring him down by pointing out that it may be better to keep that information to themselves for now. He was young and impulsive, not an idiot, so he'd undoubtedly figure it out himself. But as the hairs on the back of her neck suddenly shifted ever so slightly, she realized that bringing someone off of Euphoric High was unavoidable. If there's any assistance I could lend when you start, I'd be glad to, Chopper, Robin said warmly, getting to her feet. If you could excuse me for just a moment, I need to take care of something. Sure, Chopper waved her off, not even looking up from the notebook he was fervently scribbling in. I can handle this on my own, don't worry. Robin made to leave, but paused and frowned as a thought occurred, and she tapped him on the shoulder with a new arm to get his attention. The last time I left you alone with potentially hazardous research, there were almost consequences. This time, please make sure you don't conduct any research without someone nearby. If only for my sake.
Bread.
Chopper blinked up at her, confused, but then the penny dropped and he glanced down at his notebook, grimacing uncomfortably before stuffing it away in his knapsack. I'll be careful. And Robin. The grateful smile he sent her way would have melted the heart of a lesser woman. Thank you. Truly. Robin nodded, making to slip away, but paused again as another thought occurred to her. By the way, you never did say what happened to Indigo. Chopper's eyes flashed cyan as he snarled. I guarantee you that the bastard is rotting. Whether he's doing it in hell or impelled down, I couldn't tell you, but either way. He shook his head. The world's a better place for it. Oh, doctor. Indigo's mind was a blur as he marched between a pair of guards. A cloth was wrapped around his eyes and handcuffs that he wagered were made of sea prism stone held his arms behind his back. He could have broken free in a moment, he had enough chemicals on hand. But he knew too little. His genius mind was sure of only 3 things about his present situation. He had been captured, he was being kept alive, at least for the moment, and he wasn't in the presence of Marines. The last of those he could discern by the fact that he had not been informed of his crimes the moment his captors saw that he was lucid. He had been ordered to walk and not speak, and with no alternative he did so, finding as he did that his captors had taken his favorite shoes as well. More light streamed through his blindfold, and he felt a gentle hand lift a corner. The face he could see was framed by blonde hair and had eyes of color of glass. She was smiling pleasantly, but the moment she spoke, Indigo identified the same sadism that his captain held. You have been spared from perishing along with your captain and the rest of your crew due to your expertise. From this point forward, you are in the employment of the world government. You will be provided with adequate room and board and all the resources that you need to continue your research. Everything you have discovered to this point and everything that you discover from this point on is forfeit to the government. Resistance and retaliation will be punished. Indigo took a few moments to respond. Said response started with a twisting sneer, but the scathing retort transformed into a gasp of pain by the bullet that pierced his shoulder. Do not misunderstand, Dr. Indigo. You do not have a choice in this matter, and you are forbidden to die until the world government can make no further use of you. And do not think that that ensures your safety from punishment. You know as well as anyone that even if we can't kill you... Indigo screamed in agony as no fewer than a dozen holes turned his left arm into Swiss cheese. It's quite surprising what a person can live through. Now, why don't you make this easy on yourself? I'd like nothing more than to keep shooting you full of holes, but the less we have to spend on patching you up, the better. Indigo had thought that he knew the meaning of hatred when he was upstaged by an adolescent reindeer who was only intelligent because of his devil fruit, but this was nothing short of his worst nightmare. He had all the resources that he needed to accelerate his research beyond how he could dream of, and all of it was forfeit to the government. His brilliance would fade into the government's dominion, reinforcing their imperialism rather than proving his genius. But he had his captain's patience. He would rid his situation and consider the details. And he would listen to what his senses told him. His pride in his abilities remained strong, but he wouldn't pick another fight that he couldn't win. By your command, Indigo mumbled with a hint of steel. He winced again as that steel earned him another blow into his side. Then the blindfold fell back over his face. Good. But try to get rid of that little shadow of defiance in your eyes. It's not healthy to consider resisting, you know. A blow hit him from behind, sending him through a pair of steel doors and flat onto his face. The doors closed behind him, and as his handcuffs were removed he heard a derisive snort. She just can't keep her hands to herself, an androgynous voice growled, before actually growling in annoyance. Hogback, get to patching him up. Yes sir, squeaked a much more familiar voice. Indigo used his good arm to rip away the blindfold just in time for a pair of hands to help him to his feet. He immediately identified the face of Dr. Hogback, one of the few medical geniuses in the world that he could accept as an equal. He lacked the chemical mastery that Indigo possessed, but his surgical abilities were far superior to the clown's. Welcome to the grind, the surgeon muttered as he led Indigo to his operating table. I think you and I will get along swimmingly. The badly hidden message made Indigo smile briefly, but it faded when lying down on the table let him see the other man in the room. He resembled a sumo wrestler, clad in red, and with a massive battle axe on his back. Welcome to the World Government's Research and Development Laboratory, he said unsmilingly. My name is Sentamaru, your officer, enforcer, bodyguard. The word was sneered out as though it was vile in his mouth. If necessary, which I hope it isn't, an executioner. The sneer turned into a smirk. If it comes to it, which I hope it does. His smirk faded and he continued speaking, sounding as though he were reciting a script. You will receive your first set of orders as soon as you are fit to work, upon reception. You have 12 hours to submit a report of the resources you require to do your work, including an explanation for each component, and the amount of time you require to complete it. Doctor. Vegapunk will review your report and verify it before your requests are granted. Any attempt to falsify any part of the report will be punished. You will be monitored at all times, he continued, gesturing to the visual transponder snails in every corner of the room. If your progress does not match your estimations, you will be punished. You will be provided with your own laboratory and all the necessities for your life. You may submit requests for luxuries if you maintain your progress. Finally, you are not permitted to leave your laboratory alone without express permission from myself or another authority. Failure to follow any of these rules will result in punishment. Sentamaru glared at Indigo as Hogback began patching up his arm. Any questions, Dr. Indigo? Clown pressed his lips together and was pridefully relieved that Sentamaru didn't bash him for that show of discontent. He was no happier about this arrangement than his captives. That was a small mercy, at least. Will I be working alone or with others? He asked at last. MPH, an actually reasonable question, Sentamaru grunted. You will be working with Hogback often. You can also expect to be acquainted with the slab's mechanical expert Ratchet. To head off any complaints about his more luxurious conditions, he was enlisted, not arrested. Aside from that, you may request assistance if you deem it necessary. But any attempts to use them as guinea pigs will be met with Sentamaru tapped his knuckle against the blade of his axe. Severe punishment. Not ideal, but not unreasonable. At least the government knew that one could not expect a genius to provide superior work under inferior conditions. No further questions. Sentamaru nodded and exited the room. I hear you're a genius who's good at long-term planning, Hogback whispered. Likewise, Indigo whispered back. They won't keep our genius chained up forever, they breathed in unison. Slam! Hogback leapt back from the table with a shriek when Sentamaru's battle axe buried itself between the two doctors. Did I mention that those feeds are live and your watchers can read lips? But they can hold us for a hell of a long time. The pair mentally groaned. Oh. Off the stern of the Thousand Sunny, the wind swirled and surged in ways that were completely unnatural. Typically speaking, this was a perfectly normal state of affairs on the Straw Hat ship, given how they were in Grand Line and B. Navigated by a woman the world was 95% convinced was an actual, real-life witch. Not that the crew was more than slightly less skeptical on that front. This time, though, the source was not Nami, nor the Grand Line. Instead, Nefertari Vivi sat on the railing of the aftmost balcony, her legs dangling out over the waves and her gaze focused on something only she could see. The checked-out look she was projecting was only reinforced by the way her hands were moving, drifting to and fro as though she were conducting an orchestra. In a dream, granted, but that was a good comparison. The princess's fingers were waving and gesturing to some tune that only she could hear. But for all that the gestures made no apparent sense, there was in fact a method to the illogical actions, or at least a purpose. For every twitch of Vivi's fingers, the air swirled in response, coiling around Vivi's fingers and body like thread from a divine, invisible loom. Strands of invisible currents of conflicting heat and cold responded to her every movement, extending into everything around her. A twitch of her fingers could cause a refreshing breeze on a summer afternoon. A casual wave of her hand could blow someone's hat off. An offhand wave of her arm could knock someone over. And that was while she was barely even trying, merely twitching her powers in the slightest of ways. All right, Vivi breathed, her eyes narrowing as she returned to reality. Now how far can I? Something cold touched Vivi's arm, and she gasped as debilitating fatigue washed over her. As though she had just tried a 100-meter dash against Karu and Usopp. That was all she had time to properly process before her entire world went spinning and she was slammed into the deck, gasping in pain from her arm being wrenched behind her back, compounded by someone else's arm clenching tight against her throat and coming a few psi away from entirely cutting off her airway. The entire scenario was completed by a sensation that Vivi had grown far too familiar with over the years, that of a blade pressing against her throat. What the hell, Robin? Vivi wheezed. The hell, Princess Nefertari, is a practice commonly known as a reality check, Robin responded frigidly, not budging from her kneeling position on the small of Vivi's back. You've been playing with your abilities ever since we woke up, and it has come to the point where even I could feel the winds moving. And while I can personally understand that you would want to experiment with them, the demon child chuckled wryly and shook her head before sobering up. This experimentation inevitably leads an ability user to think that they're invincible, a god, until they get a reality check somehow. That reminds them that they are human. The message doesn't sink in as well for some as it does for others, but it happens to every Paramecia, it happens to every Zoan. Vivi's expression had frozen in shock one sentence into Robin's lecture, and by the final word, she had gone completely limp in Robin's grasp. But not Logi, she whispered hoarsely. Lodias never dissuade themselves of that notion. Can't be dissuaded, and they go their whole lives thinking of themselves as gods. Until someone forces a reality check on them. Until someone reminds them that they're still as normal and human as anyone else, Robin completed smoothly. removing her knife from Vivi's neck and standing off of her, allowing the princess to flip onto her back and stare up at her. Up at the hand that Robin had extended to her, as well as a kind smile. I worked with Crocodile for 4 years. I spoke with Enru for 10 minutes. Through that, I know how bad Loges can get, and I know that I will not let you become like them, Vivi. Anytime your mind gets lost in your powers, I will do my best to remind you that you are mortal and draw you back. I promise. As she stared at Robin's hand, Vivi's eyes watered up and she lunged at it as though it were a lifeline, pulling herself up and wrapping her other arm tightly around her crewmate, sobbing into her shoulder. Thank you. Sincerely thank you, Robin. Vivi wept, her body racked with terrified sobs. Robin nodded, patiently rubbing her crewmate's back. I could be an optimist and assume you won't need another reminder, but realistically, one day you're going to go stark raving mad and try and wipe out some kingdom or other with a superstorm you whip up with your bare hands. And when that happens, Vivi pulled back and gave Robin a teary smile. You'll be right there to stick a knife in my back. Robin's expression flattened and she tapped the butt of her knife against the princess's forehead, and not gently at that. No, I'll be there to smack some sense into you. Really, please try and do me the courtesy of listening better. Vivi smiled sheepishly. And really, if you ever need any help with handling your powers, just ask, Robin gently assured her. My first few days with the power were intensely disorienting, and I would have given anything for some help. The archaeologist grimaced and shuddered in disgust, especially with the taste. Oh, Rod, don't even mention taste to me. Vivi gagged, facing herself out towards the ocean and slapping a hand over her mouth as she kept from heaving. I've eaten a variety of cuisine over the years, and a lot didn't agree with me, but that was. Rest assured, that will be the most horrific taste you will ever know in your entire life, Robin gagged, idly rubbing her thumb over her throat. To this day, I can't get the taste of fertilizer composed of human feces, human ash, and actual humans out of my mind. Yeah. Well, I honestly think that eating it so small made mine worse. Vivi hung her head with a tortured groan. That arrow was smaller than my fingernail, but the second it hit my tongue, it was like the air from 1,000 compacted balls of swamp gas expanded into being inside my mouth all at once. And I can still taste every one of them. Robin shook her head with a weary chuckle. To reiterate, I do know what it's like. As do many others on this crew. Vivi sobered up slowly, and her gaze turned pensive as she looked down at her hands. Yeah, but I understand a lot more now, the princess said. Understand? Robin queried, leaning on the railing. I don't think you can imagine the power rush that being a Logia gives you, Robin, Vivi explained, watching her palms and fingers fade in and out of gusting air. Even I can't fully understand it. To come apart at the seams on a whim, to split your senses everywhere just like that, become untouchable, it's unfathomable. And the sensation, her eyes turned heavensward, gazing into the deep blue of the sky. I can feel pretty much every breeze around us for several meters without focusing, and the only real reason I didn't feel you coming was that I wasn't actually trying. And while I'll admit I might be biased because of how broad of a spectrum wind is, her fist coalesced and clenched. What Crocodile and Enru became inexcusable, but if they were feeling the same way that I was, the way that I am, feeling so connected to the world like this, a connection that's going to be there for the rest of my life, I can see where it came from. So again, Vivi looked Robin dead in the eye, this time with her usual steel. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not invincible, Robin. I needed that, and seeing as you volunteered yourself for this, Vivi gave her tutor a smirk. I'll be relying on you to keep me humble when I need it. I warn you, that is a full-time job. Robin returned the smirk with a perfectly serene grin. Oh, I'm sure the rest of the crew won't mind helping as well. Especially if you're going to be even more of an airhead. Haha, hoo. Soundbites laughter echoed around them. Neither woman reacted to it. Or, well, bodily reacted to it as Vivi's eye was twitching furiously. On the one hand, she ground out, her voice set to snap. I could be responsible and only use my abilities in the most dire and critical of situations. On the other were straw hats. So thank you, Nico Robin. Vivi extended a clawed hand into the air, for so kindly volunteering. Oh, Robin cocked her brow in honest amusement. And what, precisely, have I just gyred? Said amusement died a moment later as she suddenly choked on her own spit, her eyes bugging out as she vacillated between flushing and paling. Unconsciously, one hand darted down, clawing at her pants. The reason for this was that Vivi had cut her off mid-sentence by yanking her hand upwards with a tangible burst of air. The princess then smirked and began primly examining her nails. To act as my guinea pig. How does divine touch sound for a name? Where once Vivi's eye had been twitching, Robin's everything was spasming, jaw working soundlessly. Once she managed to get some motor control back, the archaeologist pinned her student with a downright hellish glare. Juvenile pranks, princess. She hissed like a woman possessed. Really? A shrug. I consider it a step in the right direction. You. Robin jerked her head forward so that she was nose to nose with Vivi, lips split in a snarl, and her voice on par with the blue pheasant's. It was an image somewhat ruined by the fact that she was still fiddling with the waistband of her pants. What you just did is a crime that the laws of Ohara considered punishable by death. Nair. Robin snapped her hand into a fist. Gyerk. As such, she continued, heedless of the interruption, I consider it carte blanche. You have no idea of the Pandora's box you've just opened. Vivi raised her chin proudly. Bring it. The twitching intensified, before she suddenly stilled to an eye-corpse-like state and pinched her eyes shut, a rictus smile on her face. I trust that you've finished your homework, your highness. The words crawled their way from Robin's lips. Vivi's confidence faded into the wind even faster than she did, shrieking in horror as she rushed to find her notebook. Robin stared after her with a satisfied smirk, before reverting to a pained grimace. The sheer amount of agony and nonsense I go through for my friends, she groaned to herself. And so it was that the world-infamous demon child made her way back to her quarters, waddling as she fiddled with her waistband. Oh. Two of the most seasoned Marines in the Navy stood beside each other with identical looks of satisfaction as they watched another detachment of their troops return from Hervé. Serving as a Straw Hat Pirates cleanup crew again or not, they could hardly help the good mood that only seeing 50 of the most infamous crews this half of the Grand Line trudging on board in chains could produce. Shiki himself was already en route to impel down thanks to the unexpected but welcome help of Boa Hancock, and those of his crew who had survived were being collected as well. Those not present were presumed dead from the fall of the islands, but were noted just in case. Perhaps the best part of it was precisely why they were able to set foot on the land where hundreds of beasts still dwelled, collect all the criminals and be on their way. The Elder Stars themselves were pleased with the new development, and though Sengoku felt a twinge of annoyance, he had little doubt that the benefits would far outweigh the costs. Tilda. You up for this, Sengoku? Garp asked, cracking his knuckles as he faced down the beasts lined up on the edge of the newly settled coast of the island. Or archipelago as it were, given how the impact with the ocean had been decidedly unkind to the island. It was a veritable menagerie of Merveille's beasts. Big, small, fast, slow armor, flying. All these and so many more ready and waiting for the Marines to make landfall, so that they could enjoy themselves a fresh meal. I am in severe need of a way to relieve my stress, and this serves as a perfect excuse, the Fleet Admiral responded, his fingers drumming over a borrowed shinai. His skill with such a weapon left something to be desired. But as he was expected both to take things easy and to take out the survivors among Shiki's monsters, he needed something that would string his body a bit less. Then let's get to it. Garp laughed to himself, marching forward as he pounded his knuckles together. The monsters on the shore snarled at them, clearly ready to pounce, soar, charge, or dive at them to tear them apart. Horror, 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 horror. Or at the least, they were until a round of ethereal laughter halted Sengoku and Garp in place. Not out of any kind of terror, of course, but because of how, in response to the laugh, the monsters on the shore all suddenly stilled. The beasts all falling quiet as they looked around with varying degrees of nervousness and admiration. Both men looked straight up, and both men saw a familiar face. You Perona. You were one of Moria's subordinates. Then you joined the Straw Hat Pirates. Past tense, Fleet Admiral, the Spectre said, floating on her back. I cut my losses when the Straw Hats beat Moria and talked them into letting me sail with them until I could find somewhere else that I could live in luxury. And with that tyrant gone, I decided to take over his palace and help myself to all the adorable pets that I could ever want. Several Marines sweat dropped as they watched the beasts on the shore swoon loyally in Perona's direction. Garp and Sengoku's eyes narrowed, however. Nice story, brat. But you don't think that your pets are going to be able to slow Garp and I down, do you? Sengoku demanded. Of course not, Perona giggled. If I did, I wouldn't be here to negotiate, would I? Top-ranked Marines exchanged wary glances before glaring at her. Negotiate what, brat? Garp asked. Perona smiled impishly. The government was left with no choice but to strip my former master Moria of his warlord title thanks to what Jeremiah Cross revealed on the SBS. And last time I checked, you still haven't filled that slot. Suo told that I'm putting my name in for consideration. The Vice and Fleet Admirals both stiffened, and a chorus of whispers and shouts filtered in from the nearby battleships. They were all silenced when Sengoku took a stomp forward, the deck of his ship splintering beneath his boot. And why should we consider your application, you, a no-name, no-bounty minion? An associate of the Straw Hat Pirates for a position in what is literally the most exclusive task force in the whole of the world government instead of swatting you? Sengoku demanded, 2 seconds away from blinding the insolent Spectre, heart condition be damned. Well, let's see here, Perona crooned, holding up a finger as she dropped into a sitting position. Well, normally I'd save the best for last, but since you asked nicely, unlike the ones that you had to fire thanks to the Straw Hats, and some of the ones you still have on the roster, I don't have any ambitions. I just want to live my life in luxury and safety. She laced her fingers beneath her chin and smiled in a cutesy way. Isn't that just wonderful? The grind of Sengoku's teeth was answer enough. Still smiling cutely, Perona moved on, holding up a second finger. Moving right along to reason number 2, you may be able to swap my pets. You may somehow be able to fight off my powers. But you don't have to. It would be more convenient for all of us if they were on your side. Less trouble, less fuss, less men fed to beasts who were literally bred to eat them. I don't know about you, but that sounds like the most logical military decision, no? Once more the lack of response was deafening, the subordinate officers cautiously, not nervously. Never nervously eyeing their bestial opponents and then their own men. Up came the third finger. I have all the captains and most of the crews of everyone who was stupid enough to follow Shiki here with me in the palace. And I'll gladly hand them over if you accept. And really at this point, can you afford anything less than life captures, if you really want to save face? By this point, Sengoku's might as well have been carved from stone. A fourth finger joined its brethren. My powers could help you with that stress relief that you just mentioned. This time, Sengoku actually did blind Perona for a moment. Never. Okay. Perona reeled back, waving her hands in frantic panic. The light faded, and the panic did as well, the ghost girl leveling a flak glare at the Admiral of the Marine Fleets. Alright, no more screwing around. You want serious, let's be dead serious. You, if we're being completely honest, can't afford someone other than me in the position at this point. Not after 2 lemons in a row. As Perona shifted into a reclining position, she let a playful smirk spread on her face. So, shall I continue listing reasons, or have I made my point? Sengoku's eyes twitched, leaving Garp to stare up at the ghost. Let's say for the sake of argument and nothing more that you get the title. What are you expecting in return? The hero asked, growling. Perona smiled, didn't budge, though she did move her hands so that her fingers were splayed against one another. Oh, not much beyond what comes pre-packaged with the warlord position. Immunity to the law as long as I don't terrorize civilians. Like my predecessors have oh so frequently and flagrantly flaunted in the past. No Marine set foot on this island without my express permission, and no attempts to take any of my pets or samples of the IQ plant. Her gaze sharpened at that last stipulation. Shiki almost leveled the East Blue with his arum. I'm not letting the genie uncork itself if I can help it. Her eyes suddenly widened, and she snapped her fingers. Oh, and I also want to promise that you won't make me do anything that takes me more than a few nautical miles away from my island for the first 3 months. I just got this kingdom after all, and I need some time to properly build it up. Plus, she grimaced, letting her head loll back. In case you've forgotten, I've spent the majority of my life in a support position. I can be as much of a threat as my colleagues, but I need a little time to get there first. As it is, I'm no good to you on the front lines. Again, Sengoku's eye twitched, but he also began to seriously consider the offer. And the more he thought about it, the better it seemed. Only one potential issue. How are you controlling them? Sengoku asked as he nodded his head at the monsters. Can they slip their leash? Floating unspoken. Horo. That's quite simple, Fleet Admiral. Perona snapped her fingers, and one of the many boars in the crowd trotted up in the wake of a sobbing hollow, snuffling at the floating ectoplasm with clear eagerness. Combination of the carrot. The hollow shot through the boar, the porcine beast letting out a contented squeal and rolling over to expose its belly. A belly that Perona floated over to and began scratching, to the clear delight of the porcine titan. Perona's expression then flipped to cold. And the stick. Holding up her hand, she summoned a cackling negative hollow. Immediately, the entire crowd of creatures flinched back, besides the gleefully oblivious hog below her. The ghost princess produced another positive hollow and started rotating the pair of them around her raised hand. Euphoria's incentive to behave. Anguish is punishment for disobedience. Shiki and Indigo made them strong, tough, and fast, but they're just like your grandson when it comes to brains. Vice Admiral Garp, meatheads who are only smart when it comes to fighting. Garp's expression shifted to that of a man who dearly wanted to object but knew he had no leg to stand on. With a wave of her hand, Perona dismissed the hollows. Some of them are still a little rebellious, sure, probably the smarter ones, but I've yet to meet a beastie who hasn't reacted to one of my hollows. When you can control how much or how little joy they feel at a time, it's easy to bring even the proudest, mightiest beast to heel. I wouldn't advise letting them leave Merveille's shores anytime soon, not without me around, but apart from that. She raised a finger. 1 month and every biological weapon on this island without exception, will be at my beck and call. Sengoku remained silent for several moments. He could already tell that this brat was going to be a pain to handle, but that was about the only negative that he could see. He had a headache all week, and while he could fight off those beasts and the ghost girl, a chance to not fight them and still arrest 50 of the biggest problems in paradise was a much more appealing option. And if she was honest about her motivations, which he believed she was, from what he knew and from her stipulation regarding the IQ plants, then it may be that she would be more like Mihawk than Hancock. And if worse came to worse, the beasts were landlocked now, no threat to anyone. Suppressing a sigh, Sengoku withdrew a transponder snail from his coat and dialed a number that few in the world knew. Marine Code 95,000, Fleet Admiral Sengoku, the Fleet Admiral recited, throwing a scathing glare at the arrogantly triumphant Phantom. I have found a replacement for Moria. We are listening, the stern older voice prompted as Perona grinned from ear to ear. Tilda oh Tilda. This is far from the ideal outcome, the Fleet Admiral mused, his frown not as deep as usual. But I will admit that I never expected this much to go right for us. I'm impeached for a given value of the word much anyway. Garp shrugged. Seriously, what exactly did we get out of this? A bunch of mid-sized beasts who can't really make much difference against the Emperors. A roadblock island that's not in a critical position. A brat with half-developed powers who's only now going to start trying. Seems like we're just warming a seat to me. Sengoku nodded his head to the side ever so slightly. I'll admit this isn't the best choice possible, but there was one extenuating factor that pushed my hand. The world-famous hero allowed himself a snicker. What, shoring up the ranks of the warlords from 5 to 6? Sengoku's jaw twitched at the stab of guilt that ran him through, but he otherwise maintained his composure. No. Something even worse, gender equality. For a moment, the only sounds to be heard were the lapping of waves, the jingle of chains as the defeated walked into the hands of justice. And then Garp looked over at Sengoku with a bemused expression. Come again. Don't. Laugh, Sengoku ordered tersely, pinching the bridge of his nose. You have no right to. You don't have to deal with the monthly demands from the Marine Women's Rights Association. And it was either find another female warlord or sign their petition to canonize Captain Bellamere. And I refuse to let a pirate's mother become a saint. Indeed, he didn't have much choice. A nearby transponder snail piped up in Tsuru's cool drawl. Enough people hate him without throwing more on the pile. Status update, the Fleet Admiral order, entirely ignoring the jab. The last of the now-defunct Golden Lion pirates have been pacified and placed in chains, Tsuru smoothly replied. We'll still need time to transport them from the center of the archipelago, but we should be ready to depart in no more than an hour. All well already. Sengoku twitched viciously, refusing to give the specter he knew was floating above him the benefit of his glare. And here I was getting used to your horrifically uncute battleship sullying my horizon. Oh well. She waved her hand as she flopped down in front of Sengoku in a prone position, an arm tucked under her head. Don't let the currents whip you on the way out, would you? Sengoku shot a sharp scowl at the newly inducted warlord. Don't forget that these warships could just as easily return, only in the capacity of a buster call instead. As you yourself said, 2 lemons in a row. I won't be merciful on the third. Perona clicked her tongue in a chiding manner even as she floated well away from the Marine. Touchy. And you're sure I can't ameliorate our new forged relationship a bit? Or rather, she smirked as a weeping hollow peeked out over her shoulder, ignoring the way Sengoku's expression darkened. Your mood? Why, who knows? It might even help out that little bone ticker you're sporting. The Fleet Admiral stiffened, and Perona flinched as the air suddenly grew heavy around her, apparent even to her astral form. How the hell did you? Sengoku growled. Shiki found out he was gloating the entire way back to the castle. Perona yelped in an entirely dignified and not at all panicked way. But seriously, you already know how bad stress is for someone in your position. Am I positive hollows could help, even just? You had a 10-ton Hellbeast dancing to your tune after less than a day, Sengoku interrupted, his voice absolutely frigid. If you bring even one of your ghosts within a 5-foot radius of me, you'll be cooling your heels with crocodile before the day's out. That's not how it ought, screw it, Perona grumbled, flicking her hand to dispel the hollow. If you want to turn me down when I'm offering you a miracle stress reliever out of the goodness of my heart, I'll take my charity elsewhere. Turning to leave, Perona looked back over her shoulder and smirked in a way that made Sengoku know that what she was about to say was going to make him snap, and he sagaciously turned on his heel and entered his cabin, the door slamming behind him. The princess sighed and her eyes slid to Garp. One day, he's going to have to realize that not everyone who calls him or herself a pirate is untrustworthy. Siege, and you expect me to believe you for a second? Garp asked flatly, his gaze never leaving the marching line of prisoners. Come on, the first thing out of your mouth was a lie. Excuse me. The ghost princess stammered in equal parts terror and indignation. Garp looked up at her, and at that moment, Perona became acutely aware of exactly who she was talking to. After all, only so many people could manage to look so terrifying with barely any effort. You honestly expect me to believe that after 2 months on the same ship as my grandson, you didn't fall in love with him the same way that everyone else to join their crew did? Perona opened her mouth to object, but when she thought about it, Garp was right. On both counts. Her expression paled. Garp for his part just chuckled. That's what I thought. Don't worry, I won't tell Neo. You promise. Gah. Garp flinched back from Perona, who was suddenly up in his face, her expression totally blank. You really truly promise that you'll never tell anyone no matter what? The Vice Admiral took a moment to regain his wits, and then he gave a wry grin. How deep is it? Perona looked away. I abandoned Moria for convenience. I tried doing the same thing to the Straw Hats, but Shiki wasn't the only one who underestimated them. I put my life on the line for any of them. As far as she could see, somehow, nobody was paying attention to the 2 of them. Silver lining that. I won't tell anyone, Garp said with the utmost seriousness. But you had better put on a damn good act if you don't want anyone else to figure it out. Oh, I think I can manage that, Perona said softly as she flew back. Because I have something I really want to tell you. And what would that? Get, Perona cut in, her face gradually screwing up in rage. The hell? Away. From my island. The final word was shrieked out at the top of Perona's lungs. Far more importantly, a veritable geyser of howling ectoplasm erupting from the specter punctuated it. Garp stared up at the ethereal pillar in mildly respectful silence. Well, I think we can safely say that she does have the sheer power to stand among the rest of the warlords, Tsuru drawled tonelessly. Say, don't gloat just yet, hag, Garp smirked. That went perfectly according to my plan. Bullshit. Prove it, you wrinkly woe. The hero ducked his head with a yelp, narrowly missing getting pegged by some kind of hollow with a twisted face. Okay, yeah, she's serious about us leaving, hey. Garp roared, waving his hand at the nearest battleships in what was the height of military procedure. We've overstayed our welcome, and we've still got a hell of a mess to clean up back at HQ. Tell the troops still on the island to double time it. Lock them down and get ready to shove off. First smart thing I've heard all day, Tsuru said, rolling her eyes in an exaggerated fashion. What was that? Aye, sir. Kalik. Yeah, that's what I thought. Oh, raging half-wit piece of wog. Thud. Ooh, Perona groaned into the ground, trying to retooth her strict mental gears. What the hell just? Eh? The ghost princess snapped her head up and looked around, blinking in surprise as she realized she was in the palace. She sputtered incredulously. Holy hell, did I just rage so hard I snapped back into my body? Perona mulled over the thus far unprecedented occurrence before groaning and hanging her head. I really need to start putting some effort into figuring out exactly what my powers are capable of. Crow roke. Seherke? A concerned round of noises from below her caught Perona's attention, and she shot a reassuring smile at what she'd fallen off of. It's okay, Hopper Stinger. I'm fine, just fine. You two worry about yourselves, all right. That mean old bastard Cross led you two through a real ringer. The meta-sized frog and scorpion smiled and chittered gratefully as they settled down to rest. Once they weren't looking, however, Perona's smile faded, taking a look around at the reason why she'd been sleeping on her new friends' backs. While it was indeed her dream come true to move into a castle all her own and live her life in luxury, there was one major obstacle to that goal. A life of luxury required a luxurious castle, and for all that she appreciated the Straw Hat's efforts in ejecting her new home's previous tenants, she wished they could have left at least 2 consecutive walls standing. In the simplest terms possible, Shiki's once gilded fortress was a shell of its former self, with over half its structures collapsed in on themselves from structural damage, and the rest a stiff breeze away from joining them. It would take a lot of hard, dedicated work to make the compound habitable once more, and Perona had absolutely jack all idea how to go about even starting said work. I did not think this through, did I? She groaned to herself, dragging her hands down her face. Having some issues with your new home, dearie. Wog! Perona yelped at the sound of another human voice. She spun to face her interlopers, hollows reflexively roiling from her body, and then they just as swiftly dissipated when she actually saw the interlopers. She needed a further second for her brain to process what her eyes were showing, and she blinked in confusion at the newcomers. The very familiar newcomers. Why, you're Panda. GRK! Perona's breath whooshed out of her when a large weight slammed into her midsection, and dropped her on her ass. The newly appointed warlord blinked incredulously at the enthusiastic bundle of smiles and feathers hanging off her neck. XCO. W, what are you doing here? She then turned her incredulous gaze on the crowd of Merveline natives watching over her. W, what are any of you doing here? And how did you sneak up on me? To answer your last question, we didn't, darling, Zio's grandmother informed her with an endearing smile. We just walked up while you were asleep. We were quite concerned, actually. We couldn't wake you up. It was like, yes, dead to the world, sleeping like a corpse. I've heard them all before, Perona reflexively interrupted. B, but that still doesn't explain why you're all here. I thought you'd all be halfway to a new island by now. This island was our home first, Zio's mother firmly replied. We spent the last 20 years dreaming of the day that Shiki would leave us in peace and we could return to our lives here. And while yes, we originally intended to live in our village, that is, she grimaced uncomfortably, glancing at the nearby monsters. No longer quite so feasible. So we decided to come here and live with you instead. Zio jumped in with all the eagerness and obnoxiousness of a kid on Christmas morning. Can we? Perona's brain immediately flatlined at the request. You but stop bouncing, she barked, irritation boiling over. Zio stilled, as did a particularly acrobatic tiger and small kangaroo in the background. Not you too! Perona snapped at them. When they went back to whatever they were doing, she redirected her attention to the villagers. And what's she talking about? Well, said the old woman who had spoken before. First, it can't be understated just how grateful we are to you for warning us of what Shiki planned to do to us. If it weren't for your intervention, we'd all be long dead. So helping you out however we can manage is the least we can do. And considering that both your new palace and our old village have been destroyed, putting the two of them together would make things better and easier for all of us, Zio's mother reasoned. Our people have a knack for architecture. Those beasts caused regular accidents even before Shiki invaded, even with the daft green protecting us. We had to learn to rebuild quickly and efficiently. Unfortunately, we'd just be putting up shields, not anything we can use to fight back. And conversely, you have the ability to fight back against the most terrifying enemies but don't seem to have worked a day in your life, the old woman wryly observed. Perona pouted. Can't argue with that, she grumbled. In short, we'll help her build the palace for you, stripping out all the lions, of course, and in return. The elderly woman smirked impishly as she leaned over and jabbed Perona in the forehead. You act the way that a monarch should and keep us safe. Hand in hand. Zio waved her arms eagerly, a blinding smile on her face. You can make all the monsters nice and cuddly like these guys, right? She gestured at the snoozing symbiotic pair, and kept going before anyone could object. If you make all the monsters nice, then that means that we don't need the smelly daft greens anymore, and no one gets sick anymore. Right. That actually took Zio's family by surprise, and they exchanged shocked looks. Who? Told you she was smarter than she acts, Granny smugly stated. But the Merveline wasn't quite done yet. Oh. And also you've got to be the bestest big sister ever while Ever's away on her adventures. And that line made Perona's brain flatline. Again. Granny slapped a hand to her face. Then again. Zio. Her mother gasped in a scolding tone. Miss Perona, I am so. It took Perona a second to reboot her brain again, and she was still decidedly flustered. No that's. Her demeanor slowly shifted into a tearful smile. That sounds great, actually. To the surprise of all present, Perona leaned forward, and when she leaned her forehead against Zio's, they couldn't help the fond smiles that crept onto their faces. I've always wanted a real sister, Perona laughed weakly, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. And so began the reign of Helby's queen princess. I am a princess. Perona, Grand Marshal of Merveille and Warlord of the Seas. Oh, Golden Week, do you have a second? The woman in question glanced up from her paint mixing to see the top of Mary's head. Shifting down revealed the whole of the ship girl, and the odd mix of disgust, annoyance, and how the hell do I word this on her face. The ex-assassin took a second to gauge her interest in whatever nonsense the straw hat was about to pull her into before sighing defeat.
I'm gonna go.
Well, at
I'm
least it was
tired.
interesting. She silently groaned, putting down her stir before turning to fully face the ship girl. I have a few minutes. What do you need? Mary glanced at the slightly larger cannibal coasting alongside 1,000 Sunny, grimaced, and then said, I know you can change people's minds with your paints, and I need you to do that for me now. Specifically, I need you to give the cannibal, and she let out a tortured groan and clawed her hand down her face. Attitude adjustment. Regarding Big Bro Sunny.
I'm gonna go. I'm actually... Fuck, I'm tired. I didn't sleep that well. I thought I could tough it out, but I can't. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And once again, Gamers Time, thank you so much for the 23 months. I'll see you guys later. Bye. Good night. Love you guys. Bye bye.